Hello everyone, I am the true scary storyteller, and I am here to help you today. I know you are using this video to fall asleep, so before that, like the video and subscribe to the channel. Also, where are you from, and what time are you watching right now? Get comfortable and relax. They are down there in the water. I saw several glimpses of bright yellow popping up from, and then retreating down below the surface, only to pop up again in a rhythmic fashion, like a dance routine, brightly yellow and deadly. Are they mocking us? The rotting, sweet stench of death is still lodged in my nostrils. We are trapped here, and people are losing their minds. I had found these diary pages while digging through old boxes in my basement. My wife had insisted, finally, that I sort out and get rid of everything I didn't need. Now here I was, directly confronted with a part of my past I had tried to suppress unsuccessfully for so many years. 24 years to be exact. 24 odd years of trying to understand what exactly happened in those days on a rooftop in Phuket during a horrifying natural disaster. 24 odd years of having to dodge questions of my unwavering fear of the ocean. Well, in truth, I guess being caught in a large tsunami and witnessing the immense destructive forces of nature coming directly from the great wide ocean would be a fair excuse, but it was only half the truth. It wasn't just the waves themselves that had terrified me. Someone once told me that writing can be therapeutic. Simply putting your thoughts down on paper, or in our times, more likely in a Word document, can help you compartmentalize trauma. So, I'm giving it a try. I often think of the beach days I missed with my son when he was a boy. Days when I should have done dad stuff, like throwing him into the ocean. Watching him laugh his little face off as he braved the waves, helping him build sandcastles, wrestle with him in the water, gone exploring along the sandy shores in search of beach treasure. I just couldn't. Initially, I had objected to the idea of him going at all. Naturally, my wife would hear none of that, and I realized reluctantly that my fear and trauma should not rule my son's life. Instead, my wife would go, and I would always stay home. She understood to some degree what I had gone through and where my fear came from, only to some degree. My son did not, and I sense he resented my absence on those perfect sunny days. Much to my despair, he turned out to be quite a little water enthusiast. I know for a fact that both he and my wife noticed how closed off I was about certain parts of my past. Secrets untold, especially those that are grounded in trauma, almost inevitably turn toxic in our systems. This story is about the strange and horrifying occurrences I experienced during a tsunami in Thailand. I don't have a truly rational explanation for what I went through, what I saw. All I know is this: there was something in the water, something deeply, deeply unnatural. Something bright and oddly yellow, something very deadly and evil. I have no other words for it than the bright yellow terror. I had traveled to Thailand around Christmas 2000. I had just turned 19, and I was on one of those infamous and increasingly popular self-discovery trips. Like so many other hopeful young adventurers at the time, I saw the beach. I read Into the Wild by Jon Krakauer. I watched DiCaprio walk the sandy shores of paradise until it wasn't paradise anymore, and read on in excitement and awe as Christopher McCandless set out to become one with nature and discover himself, kill the false being within. In simple terms, I thought I'd try and find my own slice of heaven on earth, expand my horizon, get to know some new people, learn something about myself in the process, perhaps. I wasn't exactly fleeing from anything. That wasn't it. I had a loving, although overprotective family. Well, maybe I was fleeing from that if I'm being honest now. Yes, I admit it. My parents had paved the way for me at almost every step, made sure I got into the right schools, made sure I never needed money. I guess I got tired of feeling dependent on them. I stopped taking their money, worked my ass off, and saved up for the trip myself. It was time I stepped up. It was time I threw myself into the world to see what would happen. I felt I needed to get away from the safety of family, of home, of everything familiar, to truly discover myself. In uncharted territory. Hell of a time and place I picked. The following story is based on the surviving pages of the diary I kept during that time and my memory. Bangkok, 23rd December 2000. 4 days before the tsunami. You could probably imagine the excitement bubbling within me. For the first time on my own, in the prime of my life, in a strangely new and exotic city. Possibilities seemed endless. I still remember driving off from the airport with the wind in my hair in a tuk-tuk, as Bangkok unfolded before me, with all its oriental mysticism and surrounding cityscapes. I got myself stationed in a decent guest house around Kaosan Road. Everywhere I looked, it seemed others had gotten the same idea as me. Backpackers crowded the streets, and strangely, I felt at home amidst this quiet and peaceful chaos, amidst the crowds of hopefully like-minded explorers, far, far away from home. Kaosan Road was perfect for me, a meeting place for young backpackers, with tons of opportunities to plan further travels. I did, after all, not plan on staying in Bangkok for too long. It was just a stepping point to other adventures. It was still early. I was in the mood to socialize, and with no real plans, I simply ventured out into the streets of Bangkok, circling the area where my guest house was located. It wasn't long before the first opportunity presented itself in the form of a taxi driver calling me over. He offered to take me on a tour of the city. Foolish and naive as I was, I indulged him. I remember how he lit up a doobie, joint, spliff, devil's lettuce, or whatever you want to call it. You know it as soon as you breathe it in. Don't get me wrong, I partook myself from time to time, but letting a high person drive me around, the busy Bangkok traffic did not seem like a good idea. I do remember feeling worried about what kind of person I had just so carelessly chosen to accompany. I was eventually led to a store, fitted for a suit I didn't want, and then subsequently charged an obscene amount for the cab ride. I didn't dare to refuse his unreasonable demand. Noteworthy mention. That same night, I heard from a fellow traveler that just recently someone had been stabbed in an argument with a cab driver. I didn't let it get me down or drive me off course because, as you've probably gathered by now, I didn't have a course. As day turned to night, and when the sun's rays slowly disappeared behind the rooftops of Bangkok, the city itself began to transform, as if a part of it that had laid dormant, hidden away from the light, started to emerge. I saw neon lights advertising different bars and locals making all kinds of promises of untold pleasures and sensations. I saw tourists ready to party. All now filled the streets. Some seemed all too aware of what they were looking for. Others simply drifted around aimlessly, in search of something unknown, something to spice up their existence. I found a small, seemingly cool place called The Hangover. I swear to God, I wish to this day I hadn't. Maybe then I wouldn't have set my course for Phuket. In any case, I went in and pushed myself through the crowds of rowdy and loud tourists and up to the bar, where I ordered a piña colada because why not? Standing at the crowded bar and looking around, hoping something interesting would catch my eye. But most of all, I was hoping someone would just take the first step and come. Talk to me. Someone did. His name was Robert, and he was from Australia. A tall, skinny, and no-nonsense older guy in his late 40s who seemed quite experienced with all things Thailand. He eventually invited me down to his group of friends at the far back end of the bar. Robert spared no time telling me about himself. He had worked all kinds of jobs in all kinds of places. Most recently, he had worked as a guide in Phuket. Among other things, he had arranged rock climbing expeditions. I probably forgot to mention I was big into rock climbing, and generally all kinds of outdoor activities back then. I already had quite the climbing experience despite my young age. As Robert talked about all the places he'd been, he made me feel like the novice I was. That was never his intention, though, as I quickly learned. He wasn't a bragger. He just knew what he was talking about, and when he laughed, he did it with his entire face and in a way that made you laugh with him and feel comfortable. Eventually, the conversation naturally gravitated towards Australia, a place I had always wanted to visit. He looked at me for a second as if to contemplate something. Then he told me to watch out for locals trying to play pranks on me if I ever decided to go. I was naturally interested in hearing more, and that's when he told me about drop bears. Supposedly, drop bears are carnivorous versions of koalas residing in trees that would then drop down on unsuspecting victims and viciously attack them. We laughed quite a lot, and I admitted I would probably have believed the stories, as I was a fairly naive person, and the idea of a hostile subspecies of koalas didn't seem that far-fetched to me. Our conversation then shifted toward Australian wildlife and fauna and the horrors residing within its diverse and complicated ecosystem. He told me about a plant not uncommonly referred to as the suicide plant. It has such a nasty sting, it made a man commit suicide simply to escape the pain. Another dangerous inhabitant was the box jellyfish, he explained. Their sting is about as deadly as it gets. A single sting will cause necrosis of the skin, excruciating pain, and, if the dose of venom is large enough, cardiac arrest and death within minutes. I found the thought of the box jellyfish equal parts fascinating and equal parts frightening. Beautiful but deadly creatures. In fact, the ocean, in all its grand, wide-reaching glory, had always made me uncomfortable to some extent. So much unexplored space. Who truly knows what could be lurking down there? Robert quickly assured me that as long as you take your precautions, the likelihood of getting stung by a box jellyfish was rather small. It was getting late, and before we said our goodbyes, Robert suggested I meet him in Phuket, more precisely in the Karen area, on the 28th, as that was the first day he would be able to meet. I agreed. He seemed genuinely nice and knowledgeable, just good company all around, and he promised to show me the greatest climbing spots a bit. Away from the crowded tours, I would never meet Robert again. I don't know what happened to him. Thinking back on those days leading up to the point where the waves came crashing down always gives me an uneasy, sad, and melancholic feeling. Bangkok, 24th of December 2000, 3 days before the tsunami. Woke up with a slight hangover. Christmas is commonly celebrated on this date in my country, so I was expecting some calls to go through on my brick-sized Nokia at some point, once all the good folks back home woke up. They were about 5 hours behind me, and at 9 a.m. Bangkok time they would still be sleeping. I used the time to do some shopping before my trip to Phuket. I got plenty of rope, a couple of snap hooks, and a harness. I knew they'd have all of this on the guided tours, but I like to find my own spots to climb. And I had good sense and knowledge enough to not attempt anything too daring. After having done my shopping, I bought a bus ticket to Phuket, intending to leave that same night. As exciting as Bangkok was, I felt it was more for people intending to party, and honestly, it was a bit too crowded for me. I was excited to move. On the way into the reception area of my guest house, I was stopped by a young-looking and hip dude asking me for a cigarette. He had sort of a rugged look, dirty blonde, half-long hair. His face I would best describe as boyish, but something in his eyes betrayed him and revealed his age to be older than you would assume. His style was bohemian. I guess I would describe Daz like something taken out of the 70s LA scene. Now, I don't necessarily consider myself a perfect judge of character, but he had an easygoing way about him that immediately drew me in. Sometimes you can just tell. I'm not a smoker. Never was, so I couldn't help him on that front. No worries. I'll find them somewhere else, he said. For a while, we just casually talked. He had come to Bangkok from India just a few days prior and seemed about as lost and without direction as I had been before deciding to take my chances in Phuket. Alex was his name, and he would later teach me a painful lesson about what mistakes, hurt, and loss can do to a person. But I'm getting ahead of myself. He asked me if I wanted to go somewhere and get a beer. I thought, why not? He was around my age, I guessed, and on his own as well. I told him I had to go make some calls and I'd be out in about an hour. Back in the hotel room, I quickly gathered all my stuff and packed it up, so it was ready to go. My climbing gear took up the most space. I figured if things went well with Alex, I might ask him to join me at some point in Phuket, even though I had set out for this trip to be about discovering myself and being on my own. I longed for some kind of company. Don't we all? I called my parents up, and we wished each other a happy Christmas. It was odd to think they were somewhere, nearly halfway across the world celebrating Christmas while snow draped the landscapes there. Here I was, in a hot and humid paradise. It was the usual song and dance I got from them. Are you safe? Don't go to this place. I heard bad things. Don't do this, you might get in trouble. Yada, yada, yada. This was one thing I didn't miss, and it reminded me I had made the right choice to travel away from the clamoring clutches of my perpetually worried parents. My 5-year-old nephew somehow got hold of the phone. Not quite a conversationalist yet, but it still felt good to hear his voice. Hearing his excitement over the prospect of celebrating Christmas brought me back to my own childhood. Decorating the Christmas tree, watching holiday cartoons, and of course opening presents. I finished my calls and went out to see if Alex was ready. He was already waiting for me, and had managed to score some cigarettes in the meantime. He had changed his outfit as well. He was now wearing a faded Black Doors t-shirt. We talked a bit about Jim Morrison and the Doors as we headed off down the streets. We passed a myriad of small stands selling everything from electronics to colorful t-shirts and small bracelets with campy misspelled English catchphrases. We dodged the many intrusive offers and eventually found a small, comfy-looking bar with seats outside shaded by palm trees. Then we ordered a couple of beers, and soon the conversation started flowing. As it turned out, Alex was 27, so he was a bit older than I had initially guessed. We learned that we had a common interest in music. For a while, he had busked as a street musician while working odd jobs here and there, and had eventually decided to travel the world. His latest stop had been India, where for a while he had lived on the rooftop of some abandoned building while attempting to learn the art of playing the sitar. I thought about that for a second. Living it rough on a rooftop in India. I don't know why that idea intrigued me so much. It seemed like freedom to me, I suppose. Sleeping under the wide open skies, looking down on the busy streets and watching people go about their lives. I guess I just liked the idea of doing something that seemed different from what I had ever done before. Living on a rooftop, if even just for a while, was definitely not something I had done before. We drifted off into long conversations about music I won't bore you with, only to let you know we shared a passion for old-school music like The Doors, and Jimi Hendrix, as well as 90s shoegaze music like My Bloody Valentine, Ride, and Slowdive. I had Slowdive's Shine playing in my mind that day. It all felt so dreamy at the time. I eventually told Alex of my plans to go to Phuket, and he was on board almost immediately. I loved how easy it was here on the road. There was no, well, maybe, or let's think about it. Alex had been to Phuket before and knew of a place we could stay for free. Another rooftop, of course, but he had already sold me on the idea. From there, we could plan our next step, he said. Our next step. I don't remember vibing with someone that quickly before or since, but then, I guess making friends is always easier when you're young and easygoing. I always seemed to attract good company without much effort back then. I chalk it down to my friendly and slightly shy demeanor. Seems it only becomes harder to make friends as the years pass, though. At least it did for me. We got a bus ticket for Alex and went shopping. I got some first aid supplies. Bandages, band-aids, painkillers, that kind of stuff. Rock climbing is safe if you know what you're doing, mind you, but you can end up scraping yourself. And I felt in general that being prepared for whatever might be a good idea if I was to live it rough on some rooftop. The bus ride to Phuket took about 12 hours, give or take. By going at night, we could sleep most of the way and be in Phuket in the morning on the 25th. The trip down was unsurprisingly uneventful. We would take turns listening to music on Alex's Walkman or talk about things we saw along the way, like roadside bars and restaurants that were little more than a tin roof, covering a few plastic chairs and brightly colored menu cards plastered on the side of a shed. Everything in the Thai countryside seemed simpler, in the best ways possible. No big flash, no fanfares or luxury, nothing pretentious. Just a calm, laid-back atmosphere and friendly smiles from the locals as we passed by. Alex told me he wanted to start a band blending elements of shoegaze dream pop with classic rock, and insisted I learn to play the drums. He had tried but found No luck. String instruments were more his thing, he told me. I told him jokingly if he could come up with a good name, I might be down. He just nodded, looked out the window, and started talking about how beef was a rare and more expensive ingredient in Thai cuisine. And I wondered about the sudden random change of subject. There was an undeniable air of mystery over him. Judging from all the things he told me, he seemed like a person who dreamed big, but never really followed through. An unfinished education, scribbles on pieces of paper that ended up gathering dust in his drawer instead of turning into a book. A band that never really took off because he lost interest or didn't deem that it was good enough to be successful. Moving from place to place and never committing to any of them. He talked at length about leaving a legacy. It seemed to be something that concerned him. I guess he wanted to put his mark on the world, to be remembered, to prove himself somehow. I had never really thought about it myself, although I did have a fascination with historical people and the lives they lived. In fact, when I do read, I mostly read biographies. I just never had any ambition like that myself. I tried to ask Alex about his family and friends back home. He told me bits here and there, but I couldn't help but feel there was something he was leaving out. Especially family seemed to be a touchy subject. At certain points, I sensed a carefully hidden sadness behind his optimistically youthful and bright blue gaze. Phuket, 25th of December 2000. 2 days before the tsunami, Alex woke me up. It was 9 a.m., and we had arrived at the Phuket Bus Terminal 1 near Phang Nga Road. He explained to me that there were several derelict and abandoned buildings perfect for establishing a free-of-charge rooftop domicile in an area not too far from the resorts of Khao Lak. Phuket back then wasn't exactly the overcrowded tourist spot it is today, but it was well on the way. I understood why. The scenery was beautiful. Long, sandy beaches with small islands dotting the horizon, begging to be explored. Giant limestone cliffs covered in green shrubs rose up from the ocean. I was sold. We found the area Alex had talked about. Several derelict buildings were concentrated in a small area divided by a main street that, if followed long enough, led to an area with shops and places to dine. We set our eyes on what looked like an abandoned apartment complex. It was rugged-looking and had clearly seen better days. Its ghostly exterior facade beckoned us inside to explore, and we accepted the invitation. As we made our way in through a busted window in the back, we quickly became aware that the place might not be as abandoned as we had initially thought. Several signs of squatters, such as cooking utensils and sleeping mats, lay scattered here and there. Alex rationalized that it could just be other backpackers. I shrugged, and we decided to make our way to the roof. We got up to the top floor and accessed a broken-down door that led directly out onto the roof. I must admit, despite my excitement, I was somewhat hesitant. Any doubt I had disappeared when we first stepped onto the rooftop. It was perfect. It seemed it had functioned as a common area of sorts the inhabitants could make use of for gatherings. The roof was surrounded by an iron fence. Several palm trees cast shade over the northwest corner, which was perfect for when things got too hot. In the middle, a small janitorial sort of shed stood. We found some cleaning materials, brooms, some parasols in there, as well as an old rusty grill and a couple of wooden chairs. The view from the roof was amazing. We could see the large beachfront in the far distance surrounded by limestone cliffs. After inspecting the area and finding it to our liking, we sat down. Alex took out a bottle of whiskey. Unaware of the horror that would later unfold here, we celebrated in the shade of the palm trees. We had found our place for a while. After a while, we decided to put some money into the local economy and shop for supplies, essentials, water, fruit, cigarettes for Alex, booze, the devil's lettuce, cooking utensils. Although as it turned out, none of us were admittedly much of a cook. But what the hell? Can't be seen dining out every night when we were trying to live off the fat of the land, so to speak. I know, ridiculous. We were squatters, nothing more. But heck, we would move on if we became a problem for anyone here. We weren't trying to be a bother, optional but greatly wanted, a blow-up animal mascot, maybe a dolphin if possible, some new music for Alex's Walkman, a guitar, decorating artifacts of any kind to make our domicile more personal. We more or less got everything we needed and started setting up the base. Getting our hands on something funny to smoke proved the biggest challenge, but Alex finally succeeded. At a beachfront bar. Some friendly Norwegian dude who had connections, apparently. He warned us against being too open about doing drugs, even if it was just weed. Thailand has a strict approach to drugs. We thanked him, and he told us to just come back here to the bar if we needed more. The afternoon was rolling around, and there we were, sitting atop Phuket. In our very own rooftop presidential suite, we decorated the place with a few things we found. Among them was Art, our blow-up shark. They had no dolphins. Alex had come up with the name. I asked him, why Art? However, in what I had quickly come to know as typical Alex fashion, he just shrugged it off. Just like the name is all. We smoked a bit and drank some booze as the evening progressed, and I told Alex about Robert, Australia, and all the nasty things that could kill you there. Not sure why, but it made an impression on me. Insects, poisonous creatures, and stuff like that were nightmare fuel for me. Don't even get me started on spiders. Alex was more laid back on that front. He seemed most amused and interested in the suicide plant, and wondered if some poor soul had ever mistakenly tried to use it as toilet paper in a sticky situation, and we had a good hard chuckle over that idea. Poor soul indeed. As night rolled on, stars started popping up in a clear night sky, and I learned that Alex had a fascination with the universe, particularly the idea of multiverses and infinite universes. What if somewhere out there we were, looking back at ourselves, different but still somehow us? He asked me as we looked upon the starry night sky. It seemed to me part of him always longed to be anywhere else but where he was. Maybe in the past he was so reluctant to share with. Then we started talking about time. I don't exactly remember why. I think he brought it up. Anyway, Alex had a lot to say about time, like how he believed our perception of time is tied to our experiences. For example, someone who spends their life not stepping up, not really taking risks or chances, just following along the stream, just following the routine, in essence just killing time, might experience time as having moved fast when they look back, because there is simply less variety, less volume, and fewer memories that stand out to look back on. We don't remember routines. We remember breaking them. We remember doing new things, meeting new people, and being in new places. It creates the illusion and gives time volume, making it seem fuller and longer. I like that idea a lot. It made sense to me. Make sure you live life to the fullest and waste as little time as possible. I told him about my 10th grade math teacher and how he said something about time I will never forget. Our perception of time can be measured mathematically. For example, to a 4-year-old turning 5, the transition of a year will seem much longer than it will to a 24-year-old turning 25, because 1 in 5 is a larger fraction than 1 in 25. It blew my mind. The longer you live, the faster time seems to pass. But I agreed with him. Maybe the quality and variety of the lives we live and the memories we make influence our perception of time too. Alex made a boom sound and motioned with his hands around his head. We both started laughing. We were quite stoned at that point, and well, some of you might know how being stoned sometimes throws you into these philosophical conversations. It was nice. I enjoyed the ease with which I could talk to Alex about all kinds of things, even if some things were off limits. At one point, I asked him a hypothetical. If he could go back in time and change just one thing, what would he change? He fell silent. I once again sensed the sadness creeping behind his eyes. It was as if he was about to answer, like he was sizing me up. But then his face changed, and he shot the idea down. Time travel is impossible, so why bother? Was his only response, and I accepted that whatever troubled him in the past was not for me to know, even if my interest only grew stronger and stronger. I told him about my family, my overprotective mother, my father and his desperate attempts to get me interested in cars, about my older sister and my silly nephew. Alex nodded, and asked the usual polite questions. When the subject landed on my little brother, his interest seemed to spark significantly. How old was he? Was I a good older brother? Did I look out for him? I told him in all honesty that I found my little brother of 10 years to be a pain in the ass with his constant intrusion and clinginess. Alex shot me a look that made me feel like I had said something blasphemous and unspeakable. He seemed to then contain himself, looked down and simply said, "Don't take your family for granted." I found it odd at the time, but seeing as many things about Alex seemed off or odd, I just chalked it down as one more quirk. When we finally settled in for the night, I slipped into an old familiar nightmare. It was the same I had had years earlier when I was 16. It always seemed to reappear whenever I found myself in unfamiliar territory. I was lying in my bed, paralyzed, on my side, facing the door to my room. I often had the light turned on outside of my bedroom, and it would shine in through the open door. I saw a dark silhouette approaching through the door opening. Optimistically, I assumed it was my mom, coming to wake me up. However, as the dark figure slowly came closer, I quickly realized this wasn't so. Something was off. Even though it was nothing but a silhouette backlit by the light coming from outside my bedroom, I knew this was something else. I could sense it. The dark figure uttered no words as it slowly walked towards me. My heart started racing, and before long it was right by my bedside. It sat down, and I realized it was an old woman or man. It was hard to tell because its face was just a mishmash of wrinkled flesh. It mumbled through its mouthless face, speaking in tongues. It wasn't physically aggressive, but it seemed angry, like it was just casually cursing me. I tried to scream, but nothing came out as I desperately tried to wiggle and will myself to wake up as I had sometimes done before. Back when I was 16 and first had these nightmares, I had just started in a new school, coming from having been in the same class with the same kids for 9 years. I guess the sudden change into something new and the stress related to that caused me to have these frequent bouts of sleep paralysis and nightmares. I would always wake up, drenched in sweat. Back then, though, I had been in my room, and in the dream, my room had stood clearly for me as it looked like in reality, which only made the whole thing seem more real. This time I woke up on the rooftop next to Alex, still drenched in sweat. I had screamed in my sleep. He comforted me in an almost brotherly show of affection, and we talked for a while. I appreciated his efforts, but reliving that old nightmare had shaken me up. It had always seemed like a bad omen. Phuket, 26th of December 2000. One day before the tsunami. The day started calmly. We were sitting in the shade of the palm trees that stretched across the rooftop. Alex made me forget about my nightmare from the day before by writing possibly the dumbest song about it ever. I guess I should have been slightly insulted that he would take a private, horrifying experience I had gone through and turn it into a lewd joke about a rapey succubus entity invading my teenage bedroom. But damn it, the guy was funny. I couldn't help but laugh, and I knew he only did it to cheer me up. I had found an old wooden chair in the utility shed and was drumming along on it as he played. We discussed band names, and after Alex told me about his weird, wonderful, and at times creepy experience of sleeping down on the London subway, I knew Subway Sleepers was the perfect name for a shoegaze, dream pop, classic rock fusion band. We decided on a plan for the day that involved getting me some actual percussion instruments, more weed, and a trip to the beach. We would need to go to the beach bar to visit the Norwegian weed dude anyway. His name was Thor, and he did have his part to play in this story, so I guess I might as well stop calling him Norwegian weed dude. Thor was sure enough just where we found him the last time, wearing a kitschy, flowery Hawaiian shirt. We went a bit away from the crowds to conduct our business, and soon we had a pretty neat supply that would last us some time. Thor told us to look out for people trying to lure us into a trap, apparently. Some dealers were working with the local police. They'd get unsuspecting tourists to buy drugs from them. And what do you know, around the corner, a couple of police officers would be waiting to strike. And as mentioned earlier, drug possession in Thailand is no joke. The option you were left with was to pay up or get stationed in a cell in one of those dreaded Thai prisons you probably wouldn't last a week in. Maybe he was just trying to make sure he didn't lose our business, but he seemed quite serious. Anyway, we thanked him for the advice, and Alex invited him up to the rooftop for a party later that evening and told him he could bring some friends along if he wanted to. Alex gave him our word we would stop by and pick him up, and anyone he wanted to bring along after we had been to the beach. "So we're throwing a party?" I asked Alex as we walked along the beach on a small sandy road surrounded by jungle-like vegetation. "Hell yeah, why not?" was his response. Not that I minded. "We need to go shopping then. No booze left. We gotta be good hosts." He agreed. As we walked out from under the palm trees and entered the beach, I just stopped for a moment, looked around and took it all in. Sand and ocean as far as the eye could see. Small islands in the distance. Alex patted me on the back and asked me if I could swim in kind of a serious tone that caught me off guard. I wondered what kind of question that was. Of course I could. We ran out into the waves and threw ourselves in. I went under and up again. Alex was gone. I looked around for a while in utter confusion. He was simply gone. Nowhere to be seen. Suddenly I felt something tug at my legs. Before I knew it, I was pulled under. When I re-emerged, Alex was laughing at me. I lunged at him, and before long we were wrestling around in the waves like a couple of kids peeking on sugar. At one point, Alex dragged me along like a rag doll until I got the upper hand and swiped his legs away from under him. I used the moment to get some distance to contemplate my strategy. He had me in terms of size, but I was faster. When he came, for me a second time, I quickly dodged him and went for his legs again. We fooled around like that for maybe half an hour before we sat down on the beach, both panting and laughing like idiots. Alex tapped my shoulder and thanked me for being a good sport. I sensed he had needed that somehow. His eyes lit up like a Christmas tree, and I think I saw glimpses of genuine childlike happiness. I haven't played like that in the ocean since I was a kid. The way he said it was odd. As if he was about to say something else, he stopped and then went with the kid line. I just said, "You never get too old to play in the ocean," and he agreed with a small tempered nod. Come to think of it now, that was the last time I went to the beach. The next couple of hours we just walked along the shore and left our footprints in the sand. When we got bored, we headed back to the beach bar to see if Thor was ready to go. In the meantime, he had gotten company. If I had known that I would be trapped in hell on earth with these people, I might have screened them a bit more. Hindsight is 20/20, right? There were 2 chicks from Spain Thor had picked up at a bar in Bangkok some weeks prior. A guy from Italy, the others simply called Franco, immediately gave me an odd and chilling vibe. Something about the look in his eyes. The last dude named Matt was from Canada, and was seemingly someone the others had just met that same day. We all headed to the stores to buy supplies. Plenty of booze, plastic cups, snacks. Alex and I promised a small live concert with our shitty half-finished music, and the evening was set to be a success. I wish I could tell you in detail about the party we threw that night. I really do. I wish I could put off the inevitable just a little longer. But here's where my memory gets a bit fuzzy. I didn't usually get that drunk, but that night was an exception. The parts I do remember are this. Thor had brought a boombox, and I remember Born Slippy from the soundtrack of Trainspotting was blasting through the air in the hours before dusk as the sun was slowly setting. I remember Alex and me dancing, like fools. I remember that we did give our improvised concert, which we should probably have started with before we got drunk. I remember Thor trying to get with one of the chicks he had brought along and getting brutally rejected. I remember Franco and Matt getting into some kind of argument. I remember the sunset over Phuket. I remember nothing else really from that night. Phuket, 27th of December, 2000. Day of the tsunami, I woke up with quite a hangover. The first thing I thought of was water. I needed water. I found a half-full bottle and downed it all in one go. I looked around and noticed the 2 chicks from Spain had left. Thor, Franco, Matt, and Alex lay scattered around the rooftop in various spots of shade. I checked the time. Around 11 a.m. I sat down in one of the chairs to relax and take in the view of Phuket bathed in the midday sun. About an hour or so later, just as I was contemplating waking up Alex, I heard a sudden, most terrifying and deafening sound, like an airplane taking off right next to me. That's how I remember it. Faint and distant sounds of tourists chattering amongst themselves, like a quiet bridge in a song before the chorus hits. Then, everything came crashing down. As I turned to look towards the sound, I struggled to understand what I saw. It came from the beach. Waves higher than I had ever seen before came rolling in, and people were running away. From a distance, they looked like ants scattering in all directions. The first wave hit with a thundering crash, and I saw how trees, houses, and people were swept away violently. One instant it was all there, the next just gone. It was all so violent and sudden, like being woken up with a fist to the face. The others were up by then, and Alex came running over to my side as I stood in complete disbelief at what I saw. Soon, all the water and debris were rushing by below the apartment complex we were standing on, and before long, the water was up to a few meters below the rooftop. People began floating by. Alex and I looked helplessly on as they were dragged along with the stream. The others had gathered around us now, and Thor was the first who spoke. "What the fuck happened?" My voice was shaking as I told him what I had seen. Just then, another wave came crashing down, bigger than the one before. We all took a step back. "We need to get the hell away from here," Thor said, and I just gestured down on the rushing water and debris below. He looked frightened. Matt, who was unbelievably cool-headed given the situation, calmed him down. Alex pointed towards the water below us, and I saw immediately what he was gesturing at. A man was clinging on for dear life to the side of a balcony belonging to the building opposite from us. It looked like he was losing his grip. He looked over at us with a begging look in his eyes, and my heart sank. Then I remembered the climbing gear I had in my backpack. I quickly rushed over and got the rope, fastened it to the metal fence on the rooftop, and threw the other end over to the man. He grabbed it firmly and wrapped it around his torso. I could see his muscles flexing, trying to hold on tight as Alex and I started to drag him towards us. With a struggle and some help from Matt, we managed to drag the man up until he could reach the metal fence and drag himself over. He rolled onto the rooftop, exhausted, banged up, but alive. He was sobbing quietly. We quickly learned he had been to the beach with his family, a wife and young daughter. He told us his name was Thomas. Matt took him aside as Alex and I turned towards the rushing water below. More people came floating by, and some of them managed to grab on to various things. We quickly realized we had to do something. The roles seemed to naturally divide themselves. Alex and I started the rescue effort, and Matt, as well as Thor, to some extent, would tend to the wounded and traumatized people. Franco was wandering around in a state of shock, talking to himself. It landed on Thor to try and calm him down. Alex and I managed to secure a rope between our rooftop and a balcony on the opposite side of the street, as a man there had managed to drag himself up on it to tie the opposite end. That way I could use a rope, harness, and snap hook to improvise a zip line and swing across to catch people rushing by. To this day, I have no idea how I managed to stay so practical and level-headed at that moment. But I suppose Alex's support was what helped me step up. He had kept insisting that we had to do something. We had to help in any way we could. His unwavering determination inspired me. We rescued a young boy. He was crying uncontrollably and yelling in Spanish, which neither I nor any of the others spoke. We only understood that his name was Eduardo. Hearing his despair and desperation tore right into my heart, but with adrenaline rushing and people still in need of help, I had to shut it off. Those initial hours, it was all about saving as many as we could. I had no time to process anything. As the day went along, we were working mechanically like robots. We didn't think about how some of the people we dragged up complained about being bitten by something, how some of them seemed off, confused, delirious. We were in the middle of a horrible natural disaster, so abnormal behavior seemed quite normal in that context. Initially, we assumed they must have cut themselves on tree branches or other debris as they were violently dragged along the water stream. It wasn't until one man came out of the water with something clinging to his leg that I realized something wasn't right. That was when it all changed. When everything became uncertain, surreal, like the beginning of a feverish nightmare. We had just dragged him up, and he was screaming in pain. Then I noticed it. At first glance, it looked like a jellyfish. The umbrella or bell, head of a jellyfish, for lack of a better way to put it, was a nauseating, transparent, and unnaturally bright yellow color, like taken out of a trippy cartoon. Its tentacles or strings were medium thick and wrapped around the man's leg in a death grip. Here is where it gets especially weird. Inside the yellow transparent umbrella was what looked like a skull, a small, oblong, and flat white grayish-colored skull with eye sockets. A pair of small, mean, and beady-looking eyes were located at the front of it. People with basic biological knowledge might note that jellyfish do not have skulls or any kind of bone structure. They are invertebrates. Yet I don't have any other words to describe what I saw. The thing disgusted me beyond comprehension. Small strings shot out of the skull and withered around inside the jellied flesh of the umbrella. I ponder now whether those were transmitters of some kind, sending out signals. The man was screaming loudly for me to get it off his leg. I grabbed a broom we found in the shed and lodged it in between the creature and the man's leg. The thing was clinging on strongly. Another oddity. Jellyfish do not cling to people this way, nor do they possess any kind of muscle mass to hold on this tightly. I spent considerable effort trying to pry the thing off, and just when I thought I couldn't get any more disgusted, it let out a bone-piercing, high-pitched shriek, just as I finally managed to pry it off. The sound was like dental drills on teeth, but much louder, and eerily mixed with a second, much deeper pitch like a distorted bass. It landed upside down on the rooftop, and that's when I noticed where the sound came from. Beneath the umbrella was a small circular mouth. For lack of a better word, this thing defied logic, so I'm trying to find terms as close to our understanding of physiology as I can. Its mouth was lined with small, sharp teeth, bloodied from having feasted on the poor guy's leg. It was opening and closing in quick succession while letting out that horrible sound. After a while, it fell silent, stepped back in absolute horror. Alex approached, and I instinctively grabbed him and held him back before he could step any closer. I improvised a grid around the thing using chairs and informed everyone to stay away from it. When faced with something you don't understand, something unknown, caution is necessary. The others gathered around the creature and looked at it in amazement. I told them all to keep their distance. Matt and I managed to drag the guy who had been bitten into the shade of the palm trees. That's where we improvised a section for the injured. I asked him how he was feeling, and he told me he had a strong, stinging, and painful sensation in his leg. He was feverish too. I did not have much to offer him except for the over-the-counter painkillers I had in my first aid kit. He gobbled it down, and I asked Matt and the others to look after him as I went back to scout for more survivors in need of help. By the end of the day, we had managed to get 17 people to safety. Many more had rushed by and been dragged along towards an unknown fate before we could get to them. I remember a young girl, maybe about 14, rushing by as I was pulling up an elderly woman. The look on her face is one I will never forget. About 6 of the people we got out of the water complained of being bitten by something, and were showing initial symptoms of some kind of sickness, which unimaginable horror and cruelty would only become truly apparent to us later. As the sun was setting on a day that had changed us all, Alex and I were resting from sheer exhaustion. Our muscles ached all over from the day's ordeal. Matt came over with a worried look on his face, and even though I had just met the guy, I got the impression that if something had gotten to him, it had to be bad. He told Alex and me that several of the people were getting worse and worse. Increasing delirium, fever, aching joints. Some had complained that it felt like their bones were on fire, whatever that was supposed to mean. I told him we could do nothing to help them beyond painkillers, bandages, and cleaning wounds, until the water subsided and rescue teams had been dispatched. I was sure help was on the way. As it turned out, I was wrong. What I didn't know at that point was that due to unforeseen logistics, the rescue efforts had been delayed in our area. At least, that's the official explanation. I now believe they were stalling, trying to contain us, quarantine us, awaiting orders on how to proceed. Matt looked worried and then sat down next to me. That thing on the man's leg. You don't suppose it's poisonous? There could be more of them in the water. I had to admit at that point I had thought about it myself. It was partly why I was worried about going into the water. Besides, the water had stopped rushing by. There were no more people in immediate need of help. The area was flooded, but I figured the water would eventually recede. I told him it was best to stay on the roof for now, and he agreed and left to check on the injured and sick. I chatted with Alex for an hour or so, and made sure he was okay, and then decided to check up on the situation myself. I wanted to see exactly what we were dealing with. As I came closer to the section under the palm trees where the makeshift hospital was located, I noticed a foul stench faintly resting in the still hot and humid night air. A rotten smell mixed with a fruity sweet scent. I covered my nose with my shirt, and as I approached, the stench got almost unbearable. I sat down beside Matt and the man I had pried that yellow creature off of. I realized to my horror the stench was coming from him. He was sweating, unlike anything I'd ever seen before. However, that wasn't the worst part. He looked like parts of his body were imploding on themselves, as if his bones were deteriorating. Matt turned to me and asked me if I'd ever seen anything like this before. I just shook my head in silent horror. As I came closer, the man reached out for me, and for a second, I flinched and retreated backward. It wasn't fair, but he scared me. A lot. I felt like a child again watching his first horror movie. The first real scare. It was a primal, bone-chilling fear. He looked ghoulish, as if his face was sinking in on itself, like he was decomposing from the inside out. He was barely able to speak any higher than a faint whisper. I couldn't hear him. No, I should have been more careful. I had no idea if whatever he was afflicted with was contagious, but I had an instinct that outweighed my fear. I wanted to help ease his pain in whatever way I could, so I leaned in to listen. "Kill me," the faint, raspy voice commanded. "Kill me, please." Then it turned into an agonizing begging, a weak, raspy, agonizing begging. "Please, you must kill me." A chill went through my entire body, and I looked towards Matt. He just shook his head. I didn't even contemplate the thought at the time. How could I kill someone? Looking back now, I wish I had. I wish I had manned up and spared him what was to come. His eyes, looking like they were slowly sinking into his head, looked frightened, fixed on me, pleading with me to end his misery. I couldn't. After that, my curiosity got the best of me. I braved my fear of the unknown and went over to take another look at the yellow creature, making sure to keep my distance. To my surprise, it still seemed alive. However, only barely. It was just oddly vibrating and jittering. In the evening darkness, it glowed so brightly yellow my eyes almost hurt from looking at it, and I felt a headache coming on. There was something else, too. I heard what seemed like an ocean of faintly whispering voices. Voices so low it was impossible to make any sense of it. They were just there, like a constant drone-like and ominous presence, a constant silent background noise. It felt as if they were probing inside me somehow, inside my mind, looking for something. Alex came to me later that night and pulled me aside. He needed to vent, so did I. It was as if the entire ordeal of the day came crashing down on me all at once. I hadn't allowed myself to feel much of anything, as it seemed I was constantly on high alert. But now, as the darkness had descended upon us, as there was nothing more that could be done for the day, it all came to me at once. I broke down. I felt so small all of a sudden. The tough, pragmatic facade I had put up fell apart. Alex placed his arm around me and told me it was all going to be all right, but I felt the doubt in his voice. He was scared. We all were. We may have survived the waves, but we had all seen that thing. We were all aware that we were trapped on a roof surrounded by people getting increasingly sicker and sicker. I had noticed the others talking amongst themselves, although only a few remarks during the chaos had been centered around that strange creature. I knew, somehow, it was occupying all our minds. We just sat there in silence for a while, trying to take in the day's events. I could see Matt in the distance attempting to calm down the sick. I heard their screams of anguish and tried my best to block it out. I spoke up after a while. "Alex, I feel like I can trust you. I think I'm losing my mind. Ever since I saw that creature, I've been hearing things, these voices, soft voices whispering. There are so many of them, I don't know. I must be going insane." Alex looked into my eyes, fear radiating from his eyes. I hear them too. For me, it's not voices, at least not speaking a language I understand. It's more of a feeling, a strong feeling. I nodded in agreement. I remember feeling some relief that I wasn't the only one hearing things, not the only one sensing something off. "What do you think that creature, that yellow creature is?" Alex looked up at the night sky. "I'm not sure. Maybe some kind of deep-sea creature? I think it's messing with our heads." I had no idea how to respond. I felt lost, doomed, like my mind was slowly breaking down. Silence swept over us for a while. Alex shifted uncomfortably from side to side. "You remind me of someone." He said it out of the blue, and it seemed he regretted it instantly. I was adamant about not letting it go this time. I felt he was on the verge of revealing himself to me, and for some reason, after the day we had, I needed to know I needed someone to feel close to. So I pushed him. "Who?" Eventually, he broke. "My little brother." His name was Arthur. We used to just call him Art. I looked at him, not saying a word, just waiting for him to continue. His voice trembled as the words began leaving his lips. "The sun was so bright that day, on the beach, and the waves were violent, brutal even. I was supposed to look out for him while my parents were away. He was just 8 years old, I was 16. I felt I'd done my part. I played with him at the beach all morning. So, when my friends came, I thought I had earned some time off. I left him alone for 20 minutes while we went and got some food at the local burger joint. Just 20 minutes, and I told him to stay with our things on the beach near our towels." Alex paused. I moved closer. When I came back, he was gone. Just gone. I rushed around, calling his name, looking for him everywhere. Then I saw it. The lifeguards pulling him out of the W water. Alex sobbed quietly. They tried to start his heart, his little heart, but it was no use. He was gone. Just 20 minutes. Alex wiped his tears away, and his voice became more hardened. "My parents blamed me. I know they did. Even if they didn't outright say it to begin with. Things were never the same. I noticed their resentment towards me. I saw the look in their eyes, heard it in the tone of their voice. Finally, I confronted them, and they admitted it. They blamed me, not as if I needed them to blame me. I already blamed myself. I endured their coldness until I was 18. Then I left, never looking back." I had no idea what to say, but so many things about Alex suddenly made sense. I understood now why he had been sleeping at subway stations, on the street, why he was always on the move to somewhere else. Suddenly I felt guilty. I had wanted him to show me who he really was, show me what he was hiding. But what did I have to give in return? I was just some useless kid who had never really faced any hardships, until now. Fortunately, it seemed he didn't need anything from me that night besides my comfort and my ears. And I gladly listened to everything he had to say. At one point he looked at me, and something strange, foreign, seemed to hide behind his eyes. "Do you think Arthur's down there now? Down there in the water?" I looked at him in complete terror. "No, Alex, Before I could finish, it was as if he shook the thought away and regained himself. "Of course he isn't. I don't know what I was thinking, but I think I did. The voices, it was as if they knew us, tried to lure us, with whatever promises they had to make. "We can't give up now, Alex. Promise me. Don't listen to it. Don't listen to those voices." He nodded silently, and I wrapped my arms around him. We bonded even further that night. We also made each other a promise. We were going to get off this roof to safety. Whatever it took. Phuket, 28th of December 2000. One day after the tsunami, I woke up to the sound of the most horrifying, bone-chilling screams. My head was spinning. Confusion and terror surrounded me, sweat dripping down my forehead. I quickly realized the noise came from the direction of the hospital section. More precisely, the screams belonged to Matt and a group of other survivors. I saw Thor rushing past me, clearly in the midst of throwing up. Matt and the others were standing beside the man who had begged me to take his life the day before. As I closed the distance between us, my eyes caught something so terrible, so visceral and graphic, it would forever be etched onto my inner screen. His head had, quite simply, deflated? Is that the word I'm looking for? In any case, I can't describe it any other way. All the bones in his body had been vaporized or possibly had melted. It had left his head looking like a puddle of skin and meat, with blood, some kind of white mucus and brain matter leaking out of every orifice. His eyeballs bulged out and almost lay on top of his deflated face. 3 of the others who had been similarly sick had died the same way, and lay deflated upon the hot rooftop next to each other, while the rest of the sick were moaning and complaining in horrible unison. Delusional, wailing voices mumbling and screaming together. It sounded like what I would imagine a choir in hell would sound like. I always considered myself somewhat in possession of a strong stomach, but the sight, the smell, that god-awful, rotten smell infused with something sweet, some kind of fruity smell mixed with rotten shit. It made me instantly crouch over and deliver the scarce content of my stomach straight onto the burning hot rooftop. Not long after, Matt pulled me aside, while the others gathered around the deceased and looked on in terror and perhaps something more sinister, curiosity. We must consider the possibility that whatever they are sick with is contagious. I pondered Matt's suggestion while I gathered my composure. I was still feeling sick to my stomach. He wasn't wrong. None of us knew what we were dealing with. Here, the sick people were all getting proportionally worse. Matt, who had observed them during the previous day and night, explained to me the progression of the sickness. Fever came first, then pain in the joints, then sharply aching bones, then delusion and mental decline. Finally, it seemed after a while that their bones started to deteriorate rapidly. We had no idea exactly how those people got sick, although my own opinion, and Matt agreed, was that they had been bitten by that creature and whatever poison was injected into them from the bite was making them sick. The others, including and most prominently Franco, were pushing to contain the sick with as little interaction as possible. It felt like he wanted to hide them away, to forget about them. It didn't sit right with me to leave them all to themselves. Matt and I agreed that those who had already interacted with them would continue to do so. That meant me, Matt Thor, and Alex. Not too long after my talk with Matt, Alex pulled me aside. He was concerned because people were agitated. Things were heating up. The sight of the deceased people and the entire damn situation we were in had rattled everyone, and we decided to gather them all around to discuss things. They all huddled up around us as I began speaking. I was never one to like the sound of my voice. Always kept quiet. However, it landed on me to find the words. I'm sure we're all scared. I'm sure we're all trying to figure out what exactly is happening. I know some of you want to get off this roof right now and take your chances in the water. I want to just share my thoughts first, and then people can decide for themselves. I believe that the yellow creature we found on the man's leg is what is making these people sick. I believe it is poisonous. I think it is messing with our heads too. I can't say for sure that whatever it is infecting these people with isn't contagious because I don't know what this thing is. However, seeing as none of us are showing any symptoms, I doubt whatever that sickness is airborne. I still think we should be careful when dealing with the sick, but we still have a responsibility to care for them the best we can. We can't abandon them like this. Franco interrupted me. Who made you the leader? Why should we listen to you? All of this happened for a reason. I know it did. The waves, the sickness, these are all signs. You saw it. Can't you hear them? Calling out. We have to go into the water. I looked him dead in the eyes. You want to take your chances with those things down there? We don't know what they are. Franco looked frantically around for support, but found only a few nodding faces in the crowd. I saw that glimpse behind his eyes, something foreign, like the look Alex had briefly had when he asked me if his little brother might be waiting for him down there, with them. Franco backed down, for the time being. The entire day, people were arguing amongst themselves, fearful voices whispering in corners. I noticed that Franco was the one most prominently whispering in their ears. I had no idea what kind of nonsense he was filling them with, but whatever it was, it didn't help the tension. I felt uneasy about him, so I went to Thor to try and get an angle on him. Thor wasn't of much help, unfortunately. He said he had met him about a month prior in Bangkok. By Thor's account, Franco had basically just attached himself to Thor, and Thor, being the careless, whatever kind of guy, had just dragged him along. He did mention that Franco had mysteriously alluded to some kind of incident back in Italy, but never gave too many details about it. Thor said the guy came from a strictly religious family, and whatever incident had happened might be related to that. I was about to suggest that we confront him when I heard a commotion. Thor and I both looked in the direction of the noise and noticed a person standing on top of the iron fence, seemingly about to jump. We rushed over, and I recognized who the person was. It was the man whose wife and daughter had been at the beach while the waves hit. Thomas, I believe he told me his name was. He seemed like he was in a trance. Some of the others gathered around. Him, led on by Franco. I could hardly believe what I was seeing and hearing. They were cheering him on. Thomas was mumbling in some kind of feverish stream of consciousness, all centered around memories, in random order. Memories of his daughter's first birthday, his wedding, road trips, cherry blossoms in spring, and his childhood backyard. He said they were calling him from the deep. Everyone and everything he ever loved was calling him all at once. I caught Alex's eyes in the crowd. He seemed to be sneaking in slowly, as if ready to grab Thomas and pull him back. We nodded at each other as I made my way through and started stalling. Thomas, right? That's your name? I told him. His family might be fine, waiting for him at one of the local hospitals. I asked him about his friends, his parents, and other family members who might miss him if he was gone. Alex was slowly approaching. All the while, Franco was encouraging him to set himself free. Thomas seemed to doubt for a second when I mentioned his parents. I saw hope. I saw an opening. I saw Alex closing the gap slowly. Then I saw Franco lean in and whisper in Thomas's ear. I saw his eyes glaze over. I saw a calm, distant, and dreamy look spread across his face. I saw Alex desperately reach out and grab nothing but air as Thomas plunged into the water below. I looked down. Those yellow things surrounded him, like piranhas. I saw red. In a fit of rage, I marched straight towards Franco and punched him as hard as I could. He fell backward, regained his posture, and was about to lunge towards me when Alex stepped in between us and pushed him away. Franco was rambling like a madman, man-possessed, rambling about hidden secrets and knowledge, about gifts from below, about every conceivable desire fulfilled. I was terrified to find that some of the other survivors started to rally behind him. After that incident, there now seemed to be a clear divide in the group. Between Alex, Thor, Matt, and I, and the rest of them, led on by Franco. We stayed away from each other from then on. That same night, we could hear Franco preaching to them, promising them everything they ever desired. His voice rang through the solemnly quiet night, like a low, growling preaching. Grooming them, I thought to myself. He was grooming them for the big plunge. There were moments when even Thor, Matt, and Alex seemed to waver, to doubt. I saw their eyes glaze over momentarily with that foreign gaze. They'd say things that seemed off, very private and painful things they'd experienced. I saw deep, desperate longing in all of them. I finally realized that was what set them apart from me, a great loss. Edging them towards those things, I would be there to listen to them, to their stories, their grief. Eventually, they would come back and snap out of it, as if all they truly needed was to be heard, for someone to listen. At one point during the evening, when everyone else had gone quiet, I wandered off to the edge of the roof. Looking down, I saw a sight I'll never forget. They were all glowing in the dark waters, like hundreds of bright yellow lanterns moving around in a synchronized dance. For a time, I was captivated, almost hypnotized by the beauty of the routine. I remember feeling a strong desire to know more about them. What was their purpose? Where did they come from? Did they communicate with us, or were we just losing it? Then I felt a tug on my shirt. It was the kid we had rescued the day before. His large, hazel-colored eyes lit up with fear. I immediately felt bad. We had abandoned him all alone, with a group of people who increasingly seemed like they were losing their grip on reality, merging into a cultist hive mind. I tried talking to him, but I remembered he didn't speak a word of English, and my Spanish was terrible. I remembered that his name was Eduardo. He gestured towards the water, his eyes fixated on the bright yellow lights dancing around. Mama y papa, his little voice trembled. Then he looked me straight in the eyes and made another gesture by covering his ears and shaking his head. At that moment, I realized that he too heard the whispers. That he knew, maybe instinctively, not to listen to them. I decided that I had to get him away from Franco and the others. I led him back to Alex, Thor, and Matt, who had all fallen asleep at that point. I stayed awake as long as I could, fearing what the others might do to us if we were all helplessly asleep. But eventually, I drifted off. Phuket, 29th of December 2000. 2 days after the tsunami. Madness. Complete and utter madness was what I woke up to on the second day of hell. Franco stood on top of a chair near the edge of the roof. His eyes radiated insanity as he screamed about the great baptizing of Elizabeth. Next to him stood one of the survivors, a middle-aged woman with that distant, dreaming gaze in her eyes. Alex, Thor, and Matt had woken up too. We told Eduardo to stay behind and hide. Then we made our way over to the crowd of survivors who all stood around and chanted something unintelligible. Franco went on with his preaching, and we stood nervously by and watched in despair. I still remember his haunting words to this day. Elizabeth is ready. She is free of fear. She sees what I see now, just like you all will eventually. There is a place where we can all meet, as friends, safe from the unfairness and cruelty of this world. Haven't you all felt it? Something isn't right. People are alone even when they are together. No one hears you, no one cares, but they do. They listen and they care. They came with the waves to show us the light. I sensed where this was headed, but as I approached Franco to intervene, I was held back by what could now only be described as his cult followers. Their hands were all over me. Thor, Matt, and Alex tried to get them off, but they were caught up in the sea of hands too. Nothing we could do but stand by and watch. Franco continued, I know some of you still doubt. Maybe you haven't yet felt the cold touch of indifference. Maybe you never felt loss. Elizabeth here lost everything 2 days ago, or so she thought, but her husband is waiting for her. Everyone is, and they all care so much about her. Can't you hear them? Don't they sound like home? Don't they? Sound like a calm, carefree summer day with your loved ones? A day that stretches on forever? The air was electric with the monotone chanting of the crowd. Join them, they chanted repeatedly. I struggled in the sea of hands as Elizabeth stepped up on the iron fence. I yelled helplessly into the void as I was held back. Everyone's gaze was focused on Franco and his baptizing as he delivered his final words coldly and calmly. Elizabeth, step into forever bliss. Step into their infinite wisdom and kindness. Step into the arms of those you lost. I watched as she let herself fall over the edge. No push was needed. Franco stepped down from the chair and signaled for the crowd to let us go. I remember falling to my knees. There I just sat in silence, knowing not what to say until I finally found my voice. I was done just listening. Now I needed him to hear me. I needed them all to hear me. You coward, you evil, manipulating coward. Franco stopped and turned around. His mad eyes looked straight into mine. What was that? He hissed angrily. To me, I got on my feet and confronted him. You are feeding these people to those things. Why don't you jump yourself? Franco's people started gathering around me. Alex signaled for me to be careful, but I pushed him away. My blood was boiling. Anger got the best of me. Franco let out a loud, cackling laugh. My time will come, but not yet. I still have work to do. Everyone must join them, only when they are ready. I looked around at the crowd of survivors, and in each face I saw, beneath the glazed vacant eyes, trauma, loss, and hurt. Making sure all these people jump to their deaths, is that your work? I pleaded with them. Don't you see what he is doing? What he is promising you? That isn't possible. You will never get back what you lost. You must hold on. We can get through this. Franco stepped right up to me, looked me dead in the eyes. They listened to me, only me. Do you understand? Something in his tone of voice, something in his posture seemed so childish, like a neglected, shunned, and abandoned child. I always doubted. That's how everything went wrong. I could never hear it clearly, never feel it. Something was wrong with me. That's why I was never good enough for him. I hear it now. God is real. At that moment, I almost forgot he had guided 2 people to their deaths. I felt bad for him. Those things are not God. His eyes lit up with anger. Then what? Are they? I fell silent. I had no answer. He laughed triumphantly. You see? They are God, and they are here to teach us the most important lesson of all. I looked at him. I felt sadness and fatigue washing over me. The whispers intensified. In my head. For the first time, they made me doubt. And what is that? I asked quietly. He spoke to everyone now. There is no enlightenment without suffering, without pain, without loss. We need suffering. We need disasters. We need all these things to be whole, to be united. Tragedy binds us together. This all happened for a reason. They came to us for a reason. We must prepare ourselves and join them. I was exhausted. At the end of my rope. I know what I said next was a mistake. I've gone over it several times in the following 24 years. But we make the choices. We make, and time doesn't flow backward. And what about you? What suffering did you go through? What loss made you this way? You're nothing but a manipulating monster. Franco's eyes lit up with a mixture of excitement and anger. It was as if he had been waiting for someone to ask, and now was angry it took so long for anyone to care. I caught Alex slowly approaching. From the corner of my eye. Franco pushed me backwards and Alex stepped in between us. Franco was yelling now through tears, anger, and time, through the child in him who had been abused, neglected, pushed aside, and wronged most horribly. There's no possible way you could ever understand. I see you, I hear you. You are nothing but a spoiled little boy. Do you want to know about pain and suffering? Pain and suffering are being told you are someone special, that you can talk to. God. It is the look your dad gives you when you can't live up to his expectations, when he strangles your sister in front of you, when he snuffs the light out of your mother's eyes and tells you that you are next, for disappointing him. We all have to go, he said. This life promised too much and delivered too little, he said. But now I have proved him wrong. Now God speaks to me through me. Disbelievers like you have no place with them. Everyone was watching in silent agony and anticipation. I didn't see that he was holding a knife until it was too late. I had no way to stop what was coming. Yet I still feel guilty to this day. Franco rushed towards me. Alex jumped in front of us and took the blade. I heard him cry out in pain. I saw him struggle with Franco. I watched as he pushed him off the edge of the iron fence, into the now ever more shallow waters below, finally meeting those creatures he had so quickly devoted himself to. You know how people often say these profound, meaningful last words in movies? Well, life isn't a movie, and Alex had no last meaningful words. He was just scared, in pain, afraid. I held him as he went. I tried to comfort him. I'm not going to tell you what he said, or what I said to him, because it made no sense. And anyway, I don't want to remember him that way. He was scared. It wasn't him. He was brave. He was funny. He was caring. He was my friend. I had no real time to process it back then while everything around me was still utter chaos, while still trapped on the roof, fearing for my life, not understanding what was happening to me. I understand now, as I'm writing. This, however weird it may sound, I feel I gained a friend for life, no, a brother. That's what he was to me in those days. And then I lost him almost as quickly as I had met him. It wasn't what we had in those days 24 years ago that I mourned. Those are precious memories. It was everything we never got to have. I know we probably would have split up at some point, but I'm sure we would have stayed in touch, linking up every so often. Who knows, and that's the point. I will never know. I faintly remember Thor and Matt pulling me away from Alex. Not wanting to leave his side, I struggled against them until I was too weak to resist. The rest of the day was ominously silent. The survivors who had followed Franco seemed to be in a state of shock and just wandered around aimlessly. I stayed with Matt, Thor, and Eduardo. I was exhausted. I had no energy left. I heard the whispers in my head. They were stronger than ever, begging me to join them. And I must admit they made a compelling argument. How could they not? Any place other than here seemed like a blessing. But then I felt a tap on my shoulder, or kind words of encouragement in my ear. A smile. I saw Eduardo, laughing at Matt making stupid faces, and suddenly the pull wasn't that strong. Phuket, 30th of December 2000, 3 days after the tsunami. Silence. Eerie silence in the wake of everything was what I woke up to on the third day. 22 people had now become 4. The rest of the sick were dead. The water below had subsided and was now just shallow puddles here and there. The creatures were gone almost as quickly as they had arrived. The other survivors who had followed Franco had all jumped off the roof and into the shallow water the night before. We had no strength left to stop them. I never blamed them for following Franco. They were hurt, suffering, traumatized, led on by promises of relief, promises of a better place. Now the only ones left were Thor, Matt, Eduardo, and me. I guess, sometimes, despite your best efforts to save people, they will eventually do what they feel they must do, or succumb to unforeseen circumstances beyond their control. I remember feeling defeated, yet oddly, with some kind of clarity and insight. Ironically, I think Franco was telling the truth in the end. Maybe suffering, loss, and tragedy do teach us all about life, about who we are. Because at that moment, just before I heard the call from a group of people coming to our aid, I felt nothing but gratitude and love for those who remained, those who cared, those who listened, and those who didn't make it, who stayed true to themselves despite all of the horror that surrounded them. Hell, maybe I'm getting emotional right now, and that's not what I felt in that moment in time, but it's what I feel right now. Right now, that is all that matters. We were taken to the nearest hospital. There, we were questioned by an American official who was looking to identify victims and get information. He was probing us about those yellow creatures in a not-so-subtle way, and I think we all instinctively knew that it was best to keep silent about it, because we didn't utter a word about them. I noticed people in hazmat suits wheeling in sick people to some closed-off section of the hospital. Eduardo found his family. I remember the moment they were reunited vividly. Loving embraces, tears of happiness. It made me miss all of what I had traveled away from. My overprotective mom, my dad and his stupid cars, my sister, who would always take me to concerts my mom wouldn't let me go to when I was a kid, my silly nephew, my annoying little brother. I know now that you find your true self in the company of people you love and care about. Thor, Matt, and I said our goodbyes at Bangkok Airport, and each went our separate ways, promising to stay in touch. We didn't. Despite the survivors' bond, I guess we each wanted to forget and move on. As the internet gained momentum, I tried looking up any information I could get on the Yellow Terror. Skull jellyfish yielded no results beyond tattoo, designs, and art. There were a few obscure forums here and there, but they kept getting taken down. I believe they came from the depths of the ocean. Maybe they were always there, waiting to unleash chaos, waiting to prey on our insecurities, our hurt, our losses, at the most sensitive moment. On a final note, just as I was about to put the finishing touches on this story, my son Alex called. He has been struggling lately with settling into his life in a new city. 20 years old, and his entire life ahead of him. Things can get a bit messy and confusing when you're young and trying to figure out what kind of person you want to be. Anyway, it's summer now. The weather is nice, and I think I might ask him if he wants to take a trip to the beach. Maybe tell him finally who he got his name from. What do you think? You're never too old to play in the ocean, right? One of my least favorite parts about being a middle school history teacher is the bullshit, living history assignments we give at the end of every school year. Kids are supposed to sit with their grandparents and videotape, voice record, or transcribe their oldest memories for posterity, and for an easy way to bring up their GPA. I have been doing this for 17 years, and when I collected the projects this time around, I assumed they would be as dull, if not duller, than usual. This had not been a particularly bright class, so I went home, poured myself a glass of wine, and prepared for a long night of I only owned 2 pairs of pants when I was your age. And my brother got beat with a newspaper for hitting a baseball into a neighbor's yard. And of course, these projects were peppered with innocent old person comments that were so horribly sexist and racist, you just had to laugh. Now, I had a girl in my class whom I will call Olivia. She was pudgy, quiet, and proved herself a consistent student. I expected her project to be as unremarkable as her, and perhaps that's why I was so profoundly disturbed by what I witnessed that night. Olivia had submitted 2 discs for some reason, so I began with the one marked interview. My screen hiccuped twice before a grainy image of a living room came into view. The place was a hoarder's hell. Olivia was curled up in an armchair, clutching a notebook and looking like a scared animal. Across from her sat a man with a somber countenance, smoking a cigarette and staring at her expectantly. "Go ahead," a woman's voice whispered from behind the camera. Olivia's owlish eyes flashed towards the screen, then back to the man. "I am here with my great-uncle Stephen," she began almost inaudibly. "He is going to tell us about his oldest memories from being in the army." Great-uncle Stephen looked like he'd rather be in a goddamn trench at the moment, but he waited patiently for the questions to begin. Not surprisingly, Olivia read verbatim from the suggested question sheet I had handed out to the students. He answered her curtly. Once or twice I heard her mother whisper, "Speak up, Olivia," from behind the camera. Typical boring shit. So I was intrigued when Olivia set down the notebook and asked, "Did you like being in the army?" That was totally off script. Great-uncle Stephen emitted a chain-smoker's wheeze. "Nope. Glad to get out of my town, though." "Where did you go?" "Balkans." "Uh-huh," she said. I doubted she knew what the Balkans were, and my suspicion was confirmed when she asked, "Was Balkis very different from here?" "Yes." Mom cleared her throat from behind the camera, perhaps encouraging Great-uncle Stephen to be a little more forthcoming, but Olivia seemed genuinely interested. "Uncle Stephen," she asked, "what is your very worst memory from the army?" The old man crushed his cigarette in the ashtray and then slowly lifted himself out of his chair. "I'll be back," he mumbled. The camera cut off. When the screen flashed back on, everything was the same except Great-uncle Stephen had several pieces of paper in plastic sleeves laid atop all the crap sitting on his coffee table. One he held in his hand. "I was a kid when I enlisted," he said, looking at Olivia. "Your brother's age," he told her. Olivia nodded. "I never saw combat. Both of my deployments were to cities in Eastern Europe that had been destroyed by civil wars. Everything was a mess. I felt like a janitor, for fuck's sake." "Ahem," Mom coughed. Great-uncle Stephen sighed and looked at his paper. My unit was assigned to a school that had been obliterated by all the violence. Broken windows, caved in rooms, and for some reason, the part that got to me the most was that the school had been like this for years before we got there. No one had lifted a finger to fix it. I saw kids walk by it on their way to go beg for money or whatever shit they did. The camera dipped towards the floor as I heard Mom whisper harshly at Great Uncle Stephen. I couldn't make out what she was saying, but it wasn't hard to imagine. Dow, you want to hear this goddamn story or not? I heard him bark in response. Then you better let me tell it how I want. Mom, Olivia chimed, please stop interrupting. Are you presenting this in front of the class? No, Mom. We're just handing it in to the teacher. I'm sure he's heard the word shit before. Great Uncle Stephen contributed helpfully. I wasn't a he, as a matter of fact. But other than that, the statement was accurate. The camera was lifted, and after a couple of blurry focus adjustments, the shot was the same as before. I'm talking too much anyway, he grumbled. He lifted the piece of paper in his hand close to his face. In the basement, I found this letter. I didn't know what it said, but I had a buddy of mine translate it. So I'm going to read it now. And then I'll tell you what I saw in that basement. A chill ran down my spine. Mom zoomed in on Great Uncle Stephen and his letter. His palsied hands trembled as he held up the paper. This is what he read. Dear Sir, I never loved my country. So many of these skirmishes are born from patriotism, a power struggle for the shards of a once great empire. But I do not care what name my home has on a map. This fighting is senseless, and I stay as far away from it as I can. It was not these attacks and disorganized violence that took the lives of my wife and child. It was illness. Mercifully, it happened quickly for the baby. Nadia suffered for longer. I watched in horror, knowing I could do nothing for them. My only solace is that I was there for them every step of the way. I stopped going to work one day, and no one came after me. I doubt they noticed I was gone. Since the school was simply across a field, visible from my window, it would have been easy to go for a few hours each day and come home quickly to care for them. But what was the point? All I did was clean floors. I was as useless to the world as I was to my family. I tried to take Nadia to the hospital, but the journey was too long and taxing. I brought her home, and she died that night, after Nadia and the baby were gone. Well, I don't remember much. I didn't leave my hovel, barely ate and slept, and thought many times of taking my own life. Tempting though it was, I felt paralyzed by my own helplessness. The one thing that kept me sane was my radio. I never turned it off once, even though I didn't listen to the words being said. In fact, the channel I got the clearest was in English, I think, which I don't speak a lick of. But the voices, the music, and the true knowledge that life existed beyond this violent city sustained me. I have no idea how much time passed before I saw the light of day again. I was dizzy from hunger, so finding food was my priority. My radio came with me, of course. Since I first holed myself up, it has gone everywhere with me. It talks to me, as I sleep and as I wake. I don't know what it's saying, but I know I would die without it. Once I had some water and food, it occurred to me that the only thing left to do was go back to work. So I did. The following morning, I simply returned to the school where I was a janitor and got back to work. Nobody made a big deal out of it, like I said. Nadia had been sick for a long time, and those who worked at the school knew it. I appreciate that no one had pestered me to come back to work during the hardest days of my life. The teachers never said much to me, but we smiled at each other in the halls, and that mutual respect was perhaps the reason I decided to come back at all. The place had gone to the dogs without me, so I simply grabbed my broom and rags from my closet and set to cleaning. Everyone is grateful to have me back, I know, and the best part is that nobody minds my radio. I bring it with me everywhere and keep the volume low enough not to disrupt the students. No one has ever complained. In fact, I suspect they like. The schoolhouse is not very big, but does require a lot of maintenance. The floors are always sticky and stained, so I spend most of my time mopping. Kids make messes, I guess that's why I'm still in business. Sometimes I have to move things around to make sure I get every spot on the floor beautiful and clean. But I take pride in that. And the repairs. The school always needs tune-ups here and there, and I am happy to help. Some days I'm reconstructing a desk that broke as I whistle along with the radio. Other times I handle more serious structural issues. Days when I have work like this, I feel truly instrumental, like a cog in a larger machine. How could this school survive without me? It took me a long time, but I once again feel that I have purpose. There is a larder behind the school that is full of preserved food. In lieu of payment, I am allowed to take as much food as I need. That arrangement is fine. What would I do? With money anyway? I used to bring the food back to my home just one field away from the school. But when I started sleeping in the basement, no one seemed to notice. This school is special to me, and I cannot leave it unguarded. When I am besieged with memories of my wife and baby, I turn up the volume on the radio to drown out such thoughts. It works for me every time, except this morning, because this morning I woke up to dead silence. I frantically examined the radio to see what had happened. I honestly cannot tell you how many days in a row I have been using it. Did it simply live out its life and die naturally? I have spent the entire day trying to fix it. Most of this time I have been crying. I am losing my mind without it. I have given myself until sundown. If I cannot fix it by then, I am going to take my life. I am writing this because the sunlight is starting to die, and I know what my fate shall be. I have thought about taking one last walk through the halls of my school, saying goodbye to the students and teachers. I know I will be missed. But I cannot bring myself to leave this room. I cannot go anywhere knowing that my radio is dead in here. There are no more tears in me. It feels now like I can't catch my breath. I vomited what little food I had in my stomach, and I am growing dizzy again, like I did after Nadia died. I am not long for this world, but before I take my life, I have closed the door to this room and stuck a chair beneath the handle. It is the only room in the basement, and has a small casement that lets in just enough light for me to see what I am doing. If anyone is kind enough to come looking for me, they should not be met with this gruesome sight. Perhaps they will see the doors blocked, smell my rotting body, and simply forget I ever existed. But I have placed both my radio and this note outside the door. Kind sir, if you are reading this, I have one humble request. Please fix it, save my radio. It did not deserve to die in its sleep, and I am ashamed that I cannot revive it. Now I am ready to join Nadia and little Ludmilla in heaven. I hope this school can find another janitor who loves and cares for it the way I do. The hour is now. Do not forget my radio. Stanislav, when Mom zoomed back out, Olivia had tears in her eyes. Thank you for sharing, Uncle Stephen, Mom said, her voice choked. I think we have enough. Wait, Olivia chirped. He said there's more. What did you find? Before Great Uncle Stephen could open his mouth, the image disappeared. My jaw dropped. Was that it? What did Great Uncle Stephen see? I promptly remembered that there was a second disc. This one was unmarked, but I hoped it contained the rest of the interview. There was no video, only audio. The voice that started up was Olivia's. Hi, Miss Garrity. I'm sorry about my mom, but she refused to record the rest of what my uncle was saying. But I asked him to continue and secretly recorded the story as a voice memo on my phone. I remember you said earlier this year that history is written by the people who win wars. She sucked in a breath and commenced crying. But everyone's history is important, even if they are sad, pathetic people, and even if they never won a single thing in their life. I haven't slept through the night since I finished this project, but you have to hear what my uncle has to say. There were tears in my eyes, too. The sincerity of her words was beautiful. I was also flattered that she had remembered some trite phrase I threw around because it was what my history teacher said to me. Before I got too sappy over it, the audio began again. Fine, came Mom's frustrated voice. If you want to hear the rest of the story, fine. But this is not appropriate for a school project. Let me finish. Great Uncle Stephen snapped. If it's too much for you, help yourself to a snack in the kitchen. But Olivia wants to know what happened. I heard her mother mumble something and walk away. Olivia and her uncle were alone. I imagined her looking at him expectantly. So did you find the radio? Or did it get ruined when the school got blown up? He rasped, and I heard the distinct click of a lighter. That letter, he began slowly, had a date on it. What date? She inquired hungrily. It was dated 2 weeks before we started rebuilding the school. Didn't you say the school had been destroyed like 2 years ago? Yes, replied Great-Uncle Stephen. It had been. There was silence as I felt goosebumps on my arms. The images that came to my mind were almost too overwhelming to express, but Great-Uncle Stephen put them into words effortlessly. Clearly, he had spent his whole life thinking about it. This man, this Stanislav, went to a vandalized, falling-apart schoolhouse and cleaned up blood and rubble like it was spilled drinks and dust. He smiled at dead bodies in the hallway and believed they were smiling back at him because they liked his radio. He moved around corpses so he could sweep the ground under them. The roof was half collapsed, so when it rained he must have gotten soaking wet but was so oblivious that he didn't even feel a thing. I could hear Olivia crying steadily. I found the larder he was talking about. It was all pickled, preserved, food that probably tasted like shit. Most of the stuff was moldy. Did you see the dead body? Yes, hanging from the ceiling, but still amazingly lifelike. He wasn't rotting away. This hadn't happened years ago. Did he look peaceful? She asked, a chord of desperation in her voice. Couldn't tell you. The smell was rank, and his face was blue, and his eyes were bulging, like this. I imagined him demonstrating. And the radio? Olivia wept. Heard Great-Uncle Stephen take a long drag of his cigarette. It was there, all right, and it was still on. It was never a dull moment's drive. Scotland was, by definition, a beautiful country of inspiring scenery, majesty, and relentless weather. Evie's old hatchback had taken a beating from the rain and protruding tree branches that flicked across the windshield on this dark and stormy night in late December 1996. A single peppermint sweet flicked between her cheeks, and the imposing view of her desired destination made her belly knot up. Over the winding roads across the blackened slick of sodden fields, a great stately home rested just next to the shore of one of the world's most famous bodies of water, Loch Ness. The sole of Evie's aching foot in her red leather boot pressed gently to brake the car to a squeaking halt, stopped in a large puddle created by the elements only that same day. The occasional bolt of lightning sent an illumination that lit the entire landscape. The dark, busy water of the loch, the breaking trees, and the ancient ruins of Urquhart Castle could be seen across the water opposite this great hall. She wiped the fog from her thick-rimmed glasses and leaned forward to observe the wrought-iron gate that lay open. It seemed to invite her into the grounds, while two menacing stone grotesque heads gazed upon her, the creatures themselves resembling that of the elusive beast itself, the Loch Ness monster. Outside the confines of the warm car, the wind screamed down in a rapacious gale. No stranger to extreme Scottish weather, she took a swig of something lukewarm from her plastic travel mug before exiting the car, grabbing a small leather satchel from the boot, and walking down the snaking gravel driveway towards the foreboding dark residence. Her grandfather used to tell her there was no such thing as bad weather, only bad clothing. He'd taken that from an old book of Scottish proverbs and lived firmly by it until his death. Her boots crunched on the wet gravel, and beads of heavy rain rolled off her hood. She noticed the old Victorian lamps that lit the driveway coming in just next to the glistening, wet yet manicured lawns. 2 rooms on the ground floor of the sprawling palace appeared to have lights on. One could be seen lit by the old-fashioned red and greens of bulbs that flickered from a Christmas tree. She thought it was a very similar sight to something you'd see in one of those Hammer horror flicks of the 1970s. Ivy tendrils crept up the walls, pointing to cracks in the roof. The sounds of wind wailing and hissing from the shoreline could penetrate ears a mile away down the narrow path. She grasped the antique iron knocker on the large oak door and banged 3 times. Her grandfather used to say it was the devil's 3. He had a superstition about evil coming in 3s. A gold plaque encrusted on the brick wall above the postbox proudly read, "The Ordained Society of Loch Ness Monster Hunters." The stiffened hinges on the heavily constructed oak door groaned when it opened, and presented a handsome bearded man in a tartan checkered sweater and salt and pepper hat. He put Evie in mind of Sean Connery, only with more liver spots. He greeted her with a welcoming warmth. "Let's get you inside and out of the weather, young lass," he politely exclaimed. The wind whistled a gale inside the echoed hallway when the door slammed firmly behind her. She thanked her host and pulled back her hood to view her surroundings. The Ikas. "Drawing room is just down the hallway," the man said. "You can make yourself comfortable in there. Are you a smoker?" "No, I don't smoke," she said with an awkward smile. The satchel gripped tightly to her hip. She removed her red raincoat and watched him place it on some Nessie-shaped hangers by an umbrella stand. For a man in his 70s, he moved swiftly and energized. "Pity. I have some excellent cigars I just had arrive this morning from a friend in Nicaragua. Early Christmas present. I'll be with you in a minute. I must make a quick phone call." The wood creaked underneath his strong frame when he hurried down the hallway in his slippers. Evie walked down the opposing large hallway towards the lit room at the end, the water from her sodden boots absorbed by each step on the patterned carpet runner. Each wall sconce lighting the wood-paneled entrance was decorated in dark green and red tinsel. The Yuletide merriment seemed like a facade to the dark history of this place that she questioned in her mind. Along each beautifully wainscoted wall were detailed wood carvings of the mysterious creature, making its way towards the drawing room entrance. The ruby-tinged hardwood floor creaked with every step, even on top of the carpet runner. The sheer grandeur of the place was imposing, and Evie tried not to feel vulnerable. Her prior research had suggested it was just the two of them to meet this evening. But with a place as vast as this, one could never be certain. Every room she passed along the way seemed to have shapes in them, shapes with eyes that watched her every move carefully. A gorgeous Christmas tree stood 8 feet tall in the drawing room, wrapped in old-fashioned tinsel with a Nessie head placed on top in place of the typical star or fairy. Next to the tree, a large open fireplace snapped and crackled with dry wood. The smell of oak, leather, and fine cigar smoke topped off the seemingly relaxed atmosphere. It smirked of monetary tidings. Cozy would have understated the appearance. It looked just like a painting on a Christmas card. Yet Evie was not so snug. She was very much aware of her surroundings and had a bound duty to be on her guard in the presence of this man. Her eyes were quickly drawn to the walls, a gallery of pictures and photos with an air of mystery, dedicated to the Society's supposed findings. Black and white photography, art, newspaper clippings, and even what appeared to be dried reptilian skin samples. A large bureau and chair sat in one corner of the room that featured a crystal whiskey decanter, and behind that, a huge bay window with a wide view of the moonlit loch itself. "It is Miss Gordon, I presume?" The heavy voice inquired stoutly and sent a chill through Evie when he entered the room behind her. "It's Miss Grant, Evelyn Grant," she said. "We spoke on the phone earlier today." The man appeared to be taken aback. "Very good. I'm Dr. Alistair McKendrick," he said, and offered a firm handshake that enveloped hers. "I head the Society. The Society of Ordained. The Ordained Society of Loch Ness Monster Hunters. Long title, I know, and I forget easily. More so, my old age." His charming smile did little to comfort her. She laid down her satchel next to the large leather couch and kept her smaller purse on her, within reach of her cold hands. She chewed upon the remains of the bony mint in her mouth and swallowed, before scanning the walls in the room and keeping a watchful distance from the man. Dr. McKendrick checked the antique clock on the wall and saw its ticking hands soon to be at the 11 o'clock chime. "It's hard not to be captivated by this room," he said. "It's my favorite in the entire headquarters, and as such, it's where I conduct most of my business. This room is the center, or rather the heart, of the house. The mansion itself was donated to the organization by one of our benefactors, Lady Catherine Shaw. I try to let its walls talk and tell the tales of exploits past. Evie's left eye vibrated slightly when she saw the fingernails on her hands chewed down from the sheer nerves upon coming here. She feigned distraction, but that acute stressing tell was visible. That was until a curiosity did capture her interest on the wall. It was a large painting depicting the giant grayish-brown monster facing down a priest, whose expression was fierce and determined. She removed her glasses to wipe away the steam from the room's fiery warmth. "What's this painting supposed to be, Doctor?" she asked. The doctor scratched his beard with social satisfaction, and Evie caught sight of the healed shaving cuts on his face. He loved telling stories, and being invited to enlighten people on a subject he knew everything about provided him with endorphins worthy of spending money on. "This is the beginning of the monster's origins," he said. "Saint Columba is the man in the painting. He was an Irish holy man who came to Scotland in the year 563 AD. He'd been spreading the good word of the Lord to the Pictish tribes of that time, creating a sense of unity among them of which those pagan savages sorely lacked. In the year 565 AD, at the banks of the River Ness, a few miles up the loch's northern end, one of the tribesmen was being buried by the riverbank. St. Columba asked the men what had happened, to which they told him he'd been partially eaten by a large water beast. After being told this, Columba sent one of his own companions out to swim across the river, and lo and behold, a great beast rose from the depths. However, St. Columba was brave and determined. He made the sign of the cross and ordered the monster to go back to wherever it came from. It then vanished, never to bother the saint or his tribe ever again. Evie turned from the painting and saw the doctor was standing right next to her. She moved away to gather her bearings and gave a questioning look. "So, it just left?" "Absolutely. Yes. The will of God made it so. The tribes believed they had all witnessed a miracle that day, and St. Columba's own legend grew among the church." "And your Society of Nessie Hunters believes this story?" Dr. McKendrick chuckled, dryly with an acid tongue. "Absolutely not. The problem with stories is that the original truth of them eventually dies over time. The original account of St. Columba facing the monster was written over 100 years after the event happened. And after that, for hundreds of years, there was seemingly nothing to write about when it came to the creature." Evie felt the beads of sweat trickle down her head with the remnants of rain. The fireplace was hot, but her feeling of impending dread was getting tougher to mask. "So, when did the modern-day sightings occur?" she asked. There were reports made in the late 1800s of sightings, one of a large creature propelling itself into the dark waters just off the shore. It was only until the 1930s that we had some extremely interesting witness accounts of the monster, such as, in 1933, George Spicer and his wife reported a dragon-like creature crossing the road, in front of their motor car carrying a dead animal in its mouth. Then in 1934, a Mr. Arthur Grant described nearly hitting the creature while riding his motorbike down the same stretch of road. This stretch of road is the same one you would have taken coming here tonight. This stretch of road was originally paved in 1933 and therefore has led to many sightings. Before then, nobody came in handy to walking that close to the shore down this way. Mind you, like all stories, the written word can also be unreliable. Once you hear one report, it creates a ripple effect of people seeking fame and fortune, and others who just want some attention to take away from their sad and pathetic lives. In this society, we mean to seek hard proof. The doctor kept his eyes locked onto Evie's at every opportunity, chipping away at that stone wall. "Then I have exactly what you're looking for." She stated firmly that the reason for her visit was about to bear fruit. "You have something to show me in that satchel you packed with you?" "Yes." "What is it?" "Irrefutable evidence of the creature's existence." Dr. McKendrick saw the look in her eyes and paused for a moment. He then made his way over to the desk and poured up a dram of whiskey for himself, a delicate crystal glass. All the while, Evie was sure she heard a thudding noise coming from somewhere upstairs. "Would you care for a glass of Islay's finest?" he offered. "I'd love one," she said, knowing it might settle her nerves a bit. Evie listened to that delicate clink of the glass and accepted the warming, neat double to temporarily subside her anxiety. "Excellent choice," the doctor said. "That's the drink of a young lady who has a lot to say." Out of the corner of her scrutiny, she saw a proud smile materialize on the doctor's strong face, a reaction to one of the photos on the wall. She knew he was eager to say something about it, even more so than seeing what she had come here for. She held the whiskey glass to her nose for a second to sample the smoky scent of the undoubtedly expensive scotch before measuring the very odd, black and white framed photograph of a blurred shape in the water. "This is one of the very first photographs taken of the creature," he said. "The original negative was lost, and this picture has deteriorated over time. Nothing to get excited about anyway." "Why's that?" "It's actually a close-up picture of an otter." The doctor spoke with an expression of harshness. "Why? Is that so important then?" Evie asked. The doctor didn't respond immediately. He was unreadable, almost as though the layers of warmth and hospitality were peeled back to reveal a mold behind the wallpaper. A dirty, disgusting ruination. Instead of answering the question, she watches his finger point to the next gold-framed photograph on display. "This next one here I'm sure you're aware of." It was the first photograph to show the creature's full head and neck above the surface. Evie placed her whiskey glass on the small table next to the couch and rubbed her eyeglasses once again. She recognized the image immediately as the infamous surgeon's photograph, a classic fake taken in 1934. Why the doctor would mention these fakes to her in such a fashion made her skin crawl, almost to build up to something else. That's when she heard that thud come from upstairs again. "Doctor, what's that noise coming from upstairs?" Evie's tone was nervous. The look on his face was like a man possessed with pure animosity. It didn't fit the tone of his voice at all. It was like one of those Italian horror films where the dubbing didn't quite match the facial expressions. "Old houses sometimes make noises. I can assure you, you are very much alone here, young lass. Now look at this next photo." Evie took another step back. The next photograph in this curious selection wasn't like the others. Not only was it in color, but it was also very clear. Appearing alongside a wooden deck chair of sorts on a stony beach by the water was a crystal-clear shot of the monster. Only this one was different. A gigantic sloped head resembling that of a large horse, complete with a brown mane, bearing sharp canine teeth attached to a long, muscular neck. You could almost see the liquid glistening from its skin. The body was like that of a walrus, blubbery and with massive diamond-shaped flippers. It appeared to be facing right at the camera, its black eyes practically staring you down upon viewing. Evie felt her entire being shiver as if the thing was standing directly in front of her, looking down on her like some sort of plaything. "This photograph is only on display here at the Society. You'll never see it in any express newspaper, or hear about it on any radio. This photograph here is the only one in existence that shows the real creature." The doctor was deliberate in his words, and despite the whiskey he'd been so heartily pouring, he was stone-cold sober in his tone. "And I think you already know that. Now, I want to see what made you drive all the way from London in the wee ungodly hours of the morning. What do you have to show me?" She was careful to take stock of the doctor while she picked up and unbuckled her satchel. Fragrant in its snug confines was the musty smell of something from the past. Her hands firmly rifled through, and the doctor's facial expression became one of mute officiousness. From the satchel to the oak table, Evie laid out a single VHS cassette tape and a tattered videotaped board slipcover. "What's on this videotape has been canvassed from the original negative," she said with a deep breath, watching the doctor pick it up from the table, undoubtable proof of the creature. The doctor's eyes slowly locked onto Evie's after a brief analysis of the item. "How old is this footage?" he asked. "Dr. McKendrick, this is the James Curry film." The old man was finally taken aback, almost spooked. In a reversal of moods, Evie noticed the reaction and felt her confidence grow in seconds despite the fear she harbored. The doctor's esoteric mannerisms were hard to predict. Evie was brought back to nightmares of her uncle, when his dementia in later life caused violent outbursts. "This teamed with the noises she heard coming from upstairs, caused her to keep her hand firmly lodged next to her purse in defense. "The James Curry film is a myth," the doctor stated. "Doctor, you're heading an organization dedicated to a lake monster. I hope you realize the irony in that statement." The doctor seemed like a man used to having his own way for so long that he would barely see the rug pulled from underneath his feet. "Well said, little miss," he said. "It's just that Mr. James Curry was the byproduct of a local newspaper desperate for a story." Evie smiled assuredly. The doctor was surprised by her confidence until he looked down and saw the pistol she held firmly pointed at him. "Tell me the whole story. Enlighten me," she said, wide-eyed. "You've barely been able to contain your nerves all night. Who are you?" When the cylinder ratchet clicked into place, it was as though the doctor finally took note of his own mortality. "Okay, have it your way," he said with a huff. "This is what we know here at the Society. The Aberdeen Evening Express published a story about a bank manager named Mr. Curry supposedly having captured video footage of the creature in the 1930s. He said he had over 3 minutes of the most incredible proof, certifiable evidence of the creature's existence. He then locked away the footage in a London bank vault, claiming that he wouldn't release it until, I quote, "such matters were taken seriously." The problem we ran into with this whole tale was that there was no actual record of a James Curry ever existing. The article said he'd been dead over 20 years, but there was no trace of a James Curry at any bank in London. The whole article was filled with irregularities. "That's because his name wasn't really James Curry," Evie said solemnly with a grown intensity in her movement. "I got the original footage from a bank vault in Great Portland Street, London. The vault was my grandfather's. His name was John Douglas." The doctor's mouth seemed to drop along with his eyes, drawing recollection. Evie's expression had become one of deep-rooted anger. "In about 10 minutes, the other members of the society will be here," he said firmly, "and my staff upstairs won't be too happy getting awoken by gunshots." Evie stood her ground. "Let's watch the tape, shall we, Doctor?" The video cassette slid comfortably into the mouth of the whirring tape player. The doctor's thick, shaking fingers struggled momentarily to find the channel. Evie's heart raced like a fluttering hawk moth. The glass screen on the hefty television loaded into play and bestowed a line of graininess to a suddenly clear and disturbing black and white silent first image. The doctor let out a sharp breath while Evie ordered him to not take his eyes off the screen. The image opened to display a beach at the edge of the loch. A bit of flare showed the bright and sunny silhouette and imposing face of Urquhart Castle, visible in frame. It would have made a lovely postcard image if it hadn't been for the movement on the rocks in front of the water. The unsettling contour of a bare-skinned woman lay down bound and blindfolded, evidently screaming her lungs out. 3 minutes of evidence, Doctor." With the screaming woman laid just before the loch, a large disturbance appeared in the water, turning the liquid a rolling white color. Seconds later, an enormous horse-like head emerged from the lake and slowly moved towards the shoreline. The shallower the water, the more of the creature appeared on screen. And before long, the frightening giant was fully revealed and realized in all its monstrous size. The monster appeared to analyze the woman for a moment under its rasping mouth, before ripping her away into the lake by her torso, her arms still attached to the ropes nailed into the rocks. The creature's torrent in the water subsided slowly, on screen, and 2 men could then be seen walking into frame, John Douglas and Dr. McKendrick. The tears that streamed down her cheeks paled in comparison to the internal rage that festered. This dark country trip had changed from one of discovery to one of astute vengeance. "I have to say," she said, "you've aged incredibly well, unnaturally so." The television screen buzzed to the view of tape static, and Dr. McKendrick turned to face Evie with his hands up where she could see them. "To get ahead in life, everybody has to make sacrifices," he said. "Even if those sacrifices are of other people. You've been doing this for years. Feeding people to that thing so you can carry on living. What kind of satanic magic is that?" That newspaper article was a warning to me, no doubt. John knew I would read it. He was probably trying to blackmail me with it to put a stop to it. Using the name Curry in the article was a nice chef's kiss. Curry was the name of my pet dog back in the day. John wasn't too happy when the creature ate it. He laughed. "You fed your dog to that creature?" "Well," he giggled, "yes, as a matter of fact. That's disgusting. She was a beagle. She would have run away eventually. Besides, I learned from her that animal sacrifices offered no benefits in terms of a long life. To truly preserve the aging process, you must use people. The fresher, the better," he said. "Do you know how old I am, dear?" "You are 113 years old," Evie stated knowingly, causing the doctor's nerves to show once again, her own research matching the firepower in her hand. "How do you know that?" "It was in my grandfather's diary." The doctor's face was awash with sweat, and he could feel the back of his shirt sticking to his shoulder blades irritatingly. His heart murmured as if old age had somewhat agreed to catch up with him, something he hadn't felt in years. He thought there was no way this could be happening, not naturally. It was all made clearer when Evie lowered her gun and eased off. "The trigger. You told my grandfather that the monster was there to heal my grandmother. She had cancer. He believed the ritual was a healing one, just like the miracles your Saint Columba performed. My grandfather drank himself to death in front of my family. He never got over that sacrifice you made, but he told me about the footage just before he died. The rest was in the diary." Evie heard a distinct whine that seemed to swell inside the doctor from his stomach region. Red-faced and keeled over, his voice wept in pain. "What is happening to me?" he cried. The doctor's vision swirled until short spew of translucent bile erupted from the corners of his mouth onto the tartan rug underneath his knees. His complete loss of control caused him to drop and thud against the hardwood floor awkwardly. All 250 pounds worth of him. Evie breathed a sigh of relief and pocketed the gun in her purse. "Spiked your single malt a while back, doctor. I certainly timed it well. It was nice seeing you sweat like that." The air on the upstairs landing was different from the rest of the house downstairs. It was like every sap of coziness had decayed and left just a barren dark hallway with a sickly golden-colored carpet that looked stained from time. The wooden shelves on the walls were empty, save for the dust and dead flies packed between the glass in each picture frame representing the deep lake. Every door down this hallway was shut, and Evie's sense of location couldn't pinpoint where those noises came from. She took out her gun and approached the first door on the left. The door brushed open slowly and scuffed across the heavy carpet. Within seconds, Evie's nostrils were assaulted with a wretched scent of something sour. She moved her free hand to cover the lower part of her face, but her stomach rolled uncomfortably. In the pitch black, she wrestled her arm against the wall to find the light switch. Once the large chandeliers on the ceiling filled the room with light, Evie could barely stand up. Every sense in her was paralyzed from shock. The smell, the malodorous, air of fabrics rinsed in ulcers and bodily evacuations. The spectacle of this grand-sized former dining room was replaced with a ward of sickening debilitation. 15 queen beds lined up, the women in them drugged into a semi-permanent state of sleep, save for some occasional twitching. They were all heavily bloated, without a stitch of clothing, and riddled with bed sores. Evie could tell they probably hadn't moved in some time. If they did, it's not like they could go anywhere. Their legs all appeared amputated at the knees. Those people, those poor people, she thought. It took Evie another moment to regain her strength and sight from the tears in her eyes and the sorrow she expressed. When it finally registered to her that each of these young suffering women was also heavily pregnant, the doctor's statement regarding the fresher, the better, dawned on her. This wasn't a ward, this was a farm. The doctor's bodily pain intensified when he started to wake, icy cold and raw, scarred by the jagged teeth of the rocks against his bare skin. A storm of freezing rain showered down and frosted over his thick eyebrows, his thick sweater hefty with absorbed water. He was able to move his head and neck enough to gauge being outside, on the beach, and barely able to register a struggle to escape the tight lashes of dock-line rope around his wrists. The storm was bountiful and loud, and his shock and awe grew with each clap of thunder. His soaking wet ears could barely hear the slumping on the rocks next to him, the slumping and slapping of something massive. It was a small distance away, but after arching his back sharply onto the stones to look back at the house, he could make out the silhouette of Evie watching on from the drawing room. Another crack of lightning in the sky lightened up the entire area. The doctor felt his black heart sink to his stomach when met with the curious gaze of the creature's bulbous eyes that resembled large, swirling black marbles. "My word, you are magnificent. You are indeed the most beautiful thing I have ever laid my eyes on," he proclaimed. The sound of breaking bones snapping like brush and sharp tears of flesh became lost in the elements, and the gargled screams. To Evie, it was as silent as the James Curry tape. Only this sequel had a more satisfying ending. She looked over at another frame on the wall, one that showed McKendrick's doctorate proudly displaying his credentials as an orthopedic surgeon. At that moment, she felt a wave of something come over her body, 10 times more powerful than any feeling of excitement she'd ever felt in her life. It was as though every stressor, every ounce of fear, and every feeling of negativity had just been flushed from her soul in a glow of euphoria. She took another peek outside the window at that wondrous storm and said to herself, "Thank you, Doctor. I feel younger already. I never believed in ghosts. Nothing could stay hidden for that long. And I mean, how could one not have been recorded by now? By someone credible, or on better recording equipment than a cell phone from 2010? So Loser's Leap didn't creep me out. Even though everyone claimed it was haunted and dangerous, there wasn't an actual reason to think that. I'm from Sherman, Vermont, a ghost town about 45 minutes out from Montpelier. You've probably never heard of it. You could drive through the entire town in 10 minutes. We had a humble population of about 4,000, and not a single notable thing to draw in tourists. The only aspect of Sherman you might have heard about is Loser's Leap. On the surface, it wasn't much to talk about, just a tall hill in the woods, overlooking the White River. It was pretty steep, about 100 feet over the river, with a scenic waterfall off to the west, not too close to be disruptively loud, but not too far to be unnoticed. It was a nice place to go picnicking, bring a date, hell, maybe even propose, except for one thing: the suicides. Ever since the 1600s, Loser's Leap was infamous for the mysterious number of suicides that took place there. It all started during colonial expansion, when a large group of Abenaki Indians jumped off the hilltop into the river instead of being forced out of their homeland. The story goes that since then, it's been cursed. No one really knows if that actually happened or not, and the same goes for some of the other older suicide tales. But indisputably, in October of 1970, a boy by the name of Ricardo Elias was found dead at the base of the river. He was a draft dodger on his unholy pilgrimage to Canada who got cornered by police less than 100 miles from the border. Came all the way from Florida, too. Feeling like his only options left were prison, or, even worse, the war in Vietnam, he found himself at Loser's Leap, where he took the plunge. Then again, in 1986, a boy named Mike Merkel ended it all on the same fateful hilltop. There's not a lot known about his story. More or less, he was a loner who was tired of his life. And then, in 2008, just about 10 years ago, a girl jumped too. Though her body was never found, she was known for visiting the Leap a lot, and it was the last place she was headed to before her disappearance. Needless to say, the uncanny number of suicides that took place there made it a hotspot for ghost stories and paranormal rumors. The idea was that people with no hope left, completely out of options, losers, came there to kiss this cruel world goodbye. But their spirits became tethered to the place and would push you off the ledge if you got too close. But like I said, I never believed in ghosts. In fact, the reputation the place had benefited me greatly, because I could come out there all by myself with no threat of having to deal with anybody else. I came out there all the time to sit in the grass, listen to the waterfall, and write. Whether it be poems, stories, or personal prose, it didn't matter. When I was there, I always had something to write, and it wasn't like I had anything better to do. I worked at a grocery store called Shaw's, but since most of the employees were breadwinners, they got most of the hours. I was lucky to work 3 shifts a week. Both my parents worked all day and weren't the most congenial when they were around. And my only friend was Allie Ann, if you could even call her that. Allie Ann and I had been friends ever since. We were in preschool. She had light brown hair and these big green eyes. Her parents worked a lot like mine, and so we were always left at aftercare together after school. We were typically the last two kids to get picked up. Naturally, we became pretty good friends because of it. Back then, and until around 6th grade, both of us were ignored by everybody else. We had the same classmates every year because there were only 3 schools in town: a preschool, an elementary through middle school, and a high school. There were 26 of us back then, and with the loss of 2 students who moved away, and the addition of 1 student who moved to Sherman from 1 county over, the group stayed the exact same throughout every year. Allie Ann and I were typically regarded as weird, and so we were left alone. But when 6th grade hit, the wonderful process that is puberty took place, and Allie Ann got hot. To me, she was always pretty, but the breasts and makeup sold everybody else on it. And sure enough, as is the natural order of things, when she became hot, I was ignored. The dynamic duo was no more, at least beneath the surface. We still talked a lot, and she'd hang out with me on occasion. But the friendship we used to have, that was gone. She was assimilated into the popular crowd and became more and more like them every year, until we really didn't have anything in common anymore. Typically, us talking was her venting to me about Scott, the douchebag I mentioned who moved into Sherman our junior year. He was attractive and new, and thus became the target of all the girls who were sick of the same old, same old. All Allie Ann wanted these days was to get Scott's attention, and that was about the only thing that crossed her mind, I think. At least, that's all she cared to tell me about. So, in my lonesomeness, my writing habit became more and more pervasive. And though I had the house to myself most of the time, I didn't like the vibe there. Being at home reminded me of getting snaps from Allie Ann whining about Scott not looking at her enough across the bonfire in Gage's backyard, and hearing my parents argue. It was hard to find inspiration there. And so on my 17th birthday, which I spent alone because Allie Ann was busy at a party, I decided the only place in town I hadn't seen a trillion times was Loser's Leap. Not believing in ghosts made it pretty easy to convince myself to visit. It was about a 20-minute drive from my house and then a 20-minute walk from the parking grounds. You lost reception about a minute after walking into the woods, and that's the best part. Absolutely no distractions, no predictable messages. From Allie Ann, no glaring at my phone and wishing I'd get a notification, because I knew none of them were coming out there. It became my favorite place in town, and before long I was going out there just about every afternoon I wasn't working, where I'd sit in the grass against a tree and write. But my routine of resting there and enjoying nature in my lonesome eventually came to an end. I remember that day like it was yesterday. It was a warm Vermont day in late April, around 60 degrees, and I'd just gotten out of my 7th period class, statistics. I was a senior with only a month and a half of school left, and with my classes mostly finished, I didn't have much homework to juggle with writing anymore. I climbed into my car, a red 2001 Honda Accord. It was ugly and nothing to brag about, but I bought it in full and it got me where I needed to go. Just as I shut the car door, my phone vibrated softly. I looked down and saw exactly what I knew was coming. A snap from Allie Ann. I opened it dully. He's talking to Abby again. Oh, sorry. Why Abby? Seriously? I don't know. She sent something back, but I didn't care to look at it. I looked into the rearview mirror, meeting my blue eyes in the reflection, my short brown hair underneath a blue beanie. No one was behind me, so I backed out slowly. I felt my phone vibrate again, then again. I drove to the stop sign, then opened the messages. She's not even pretty like it all. Sam. Allie, I'm driving. Oh. I put the phone down, then progressed through the stop sign, cringing at how dull she was. Sometimes I couldn't help but think about when we were kids, how much fun we used to have. She was honestly a completely different person. That Allie Ann was gone, most likely forever. Sometimes I felt like the only reason I even still talked to her was because I had literally no one else to talk to, and she was preferable to nothing. My car didn't have Bluetooth or even a working auxiliary port, and the radio stations in town sucked, so I listened to CDs. I put in the White Album, my favorite Beatles album that I listened to enough to drive Allie-Ann crazy, and drove up the winding road toward Loser's Leap. The drive was peaceful, as usual. The trees were just getting their leaves back, and the forest was becoming alive again. The snow was gone and the animals were coming back out, allowing the sight of an occasional wood thrush fluttering by, or a squirrel rummaging for food. When I got to the parking grounds, I left my phone in the car per usual, as taking it into the woods was pointless anyway, and began my trek through the woods to the leap. I wore a maroon windbreaker, blue jeans, boots, and my blue beanie, my journal in my hand. At last I stepped through the clearing, emerging into the forbidden beauty that was Loser's Leap. The sight never grew old. I sighed with relief, taking in the serene majesty of the lookout. Beyond the grassy hilltop, dotted sparingly with trees, was the river, humming gently 100 feet below. All around the river on either side was a soft dirt bank, followed by tall trees swaying gently in the cool and nippy breeze. Around the river on all sides was mostly uncharted wilderness, with only a trail or two visible from my perch, and to the west, on my left, was the waterfall, maybe 15 feet shorter than the leap. On top of the waterfall was more forest. If I climbed the tree I usually sat beneath, I could make out the water tower of Clover, the next town over to the north. But today, I leaned against the tree, taking out my journal. Thumbed through the pages, finally reaching a blank one. I withdrew a black pen from my jacket pocket, examining the page. I shut my eyes and let my soul do the talking. Scott. Why Scott? I don't get it, Allie. All you ever do is talk about Scott. What happened to us hanging out as children? Pushing each other on the swing at aftercare? Biking around the town on Saturdays and going fishing after church? It ate at me. I was jaded to her ignoring me, but once in a while it hurt me again. Scott. What an asshole. He doesn't care about you or Abby or anyone. And you know it too. Why do you just settle for that, Allie? I sighed and opened my journal. I stared at the empty page for a while, pressing the back of my pen into the corner of my lip, waiting for some divine inspiration to come. But it never did. That was fine. Sometimes it didn't. I resigned myself to just taking in the beauty of the leap again, and that's when something completely unforeseeable happened. For the first time ever, having frequented this place ever since my 17th birthday, I heard someone coming through the trees. My heart froze and I jumped up, startled by the sound. And then my mind was blown even more. A girl came stepping out of the tree line with long, flowing blonde hair that glowed in the sunlight and vibrant turquoise eyes, an intoxicating swirl of sky blue and seafoam green. On her face was a slight spattering of pale freckles, and she had sharp, fox-like features. She wore a red and white flannel shirt, unbuttoned over the top of her chest, and underneath she wore a white tank top. She wore skinny jeans as well. She gasped, startled to see me. Hey. I waved speechlessly. Hi. She waved back, starting to smile. Sorry. I didn't mean to intrude on you. No, you're fine. I smiled back. Wow. I've literally never seen another person up here before. Yeah, me neither. She laughed. I was confused by that because I came up here all the time, and if she came out here with any relative frequency, I'd have had to have seen her by now. But I knew it would only make me sound creepy to point that out. So what brings you up here? Oh, and I'm Sam. Leona. She smiled congenially. And honestly, I just come out here to sing and play guitar because I know it's a private place and no one's listening. I hadn't even noticed the guitar case in her hand. Oh, cool. Sorry if I'm ruining your privacy. I scratched the back of my head, but she replied, No, you're not. Not at all. I mean, I'm still just shocked to see someone here. Sorry. If this is weird, but how often do you come out here? Because I come out here more often than I'd like to admit, and I've never seen you. I chuckled. I mean, I don't come out here all the time, she admitted. Probably once or twice a month, but still. I was pretty sure I was the only person that wasn't too afraid to visit this place. Nah. I don't believe in ghosts, I shrugged. Me neither. She laughed dryly. What shocked me even more than seeing her here was that I'd never seen her before. She certainly couldn't be from Sherman, unless she was homeschooled and locked in her parents' basement. Are you from Sherman? I inquired. I've never seen you around. No, I'm from Clover. Wow, that's a bit of a drive. Yeah, that's why I don't come out here more. But it's worth the drive. Sucks this place has such a bad reputation. It's gorgeous. Agreed, I nodded. Well, you mentioned you come out here. A lot, but you didn't tell me why, she inquired with a curious smile. So, what's your reason for coming out to Loser's Leap? I felt awkward admitting it. I mean, I just come out here to write. Write what? All kinds of stuff, stories, prose, poems, mostly poems. Ooh, neat, she grinned excitedly, and my heart fluttered at the sight. Let me read one. Only if you play me a song first. Ah, a trade. You're proposing then? She cut her eyes at me challengingly. Well, I accept your offer. I'm not that good, though, she confessed with rosy cheeks, and once again my heart soared. Oh, I doubt that, I replied. I was kidding. Though, you don't really have to. No, it's cool, she assured, walking over to a rock and sitting on it before opening her case and pulling out a dark brown acoustic guitar. She took a deep breath, and then her fingers stroked the strings. I don't mean to sound cliché, but when she started to sing, it completely captivated me. I mean, it was unlike anything I've ever felt. Sort of just stared off into space, taking it all in, feeling the sunlight on my skin, the waterfall and river babbling soothingly in the background. I was totally lost in the moment. Her timbre was high and light, but womanly. At some parts of the song, her voice would get soft and airy, and at other parts she sang powerfully and loudly. Her emotion saturated the music, giving me goosebumps. It was a hell of a performance to whip out for a total stranger, but her choice of such a brazen first impression totally paid off. I was completely dumbfounded and couldn't hope to hide it on my face. When she finished singing, she gently ended the song with a little more guitar playing. Then she smiled at me nervously. All I could feel at that moment was limerence. Oh no, she giggled. What's with that baffled look? Was it bad? No. I shook my head insistently, still trying to process what I'd just heard. Not at all, just wow, it was absolutely phenomenal, like I was in a trance. Aw. She shrank back, becoming noticeably embarrassed. No, it wasn't. What do you mean? I laughed. That was incredible, Leona. I mean, I felt like I was high or something. What was that song called? I Know, by Fiona Apple. It's supposed to be for a piano, but I think it sounds all right on the guitar. All right, I was chuckling. Leona, that's literally the prettiest thing I've ever heard. Okay, she blushed. Your turn. Let's see a poem, Sam. Well, See, that's where you're lucky. With singing, you can just do it, and if it's good, anyone can tell. It can be about anything, really, but if it sounds nice, it's something you can share. With good writing, I don't know, it's just different. Good poems are deep, and it's weird just sharing that, you know? Oh, I see, not upholding your end of the deal. She clicked, her tongue. Well, don't sweat it. No, I scratched my head awkwardly. I said I'd show you a poem I wrote. Well, do you want to hear this stupid poem I wrote about a sock my junior year of high school? I was trying to stay awake in class and just jotted it down. I chuckled. Wow, I play that for you, and you read me a poem about a sock, she teased. No, I laughed, embarrassed. I'm kidding, she grinned. Yeah, let's hear it, Sam. All right, well, it's quite duly titled Sock. Silently perching atop the shelf, lucidly worn and torn, bequeaths. To me, a subtle help, foot comfort in the morn. Stupid, right? Oh my God, she laughed. Wow, I mean, it sounds good though, solid meter, well-executed slant rhyme. Well, thanks, I grinned, not expecting her to look that deeply at it. And the rest of the day, all the way, until sunset, we just sat around and talked. She played guitar and sang a little more, and when I warmed up to her enough, I showed her an actual poem or two. When it was almost dark, we agreed it was time to get going. So, Leona, am I going to get to see you again? I asked. She seemed to be thinking about it for a moment. May 5th, she winked at me. Be here. Sounds good. I smiled back, more excited than I allowed my countenance to show. And with that, we parted ways. She said there was another parking spot on the other side of the leap, closer to Clover, and that's where her car was, so I didn't get to walk back with her to the parking grounds. When I got back to my car, I sat in the driver's seat. It was dark now, but the moon was high in the sky over the lush wilderness. The weather had dropped to about 40 degrees, and I turned the heat on. As Leona's face came to mind again, my heart pounded. Who was that? I was floored. Where'd she come from? I mean, wow, I can't believe that happened. I drove home listening to the country station, which I usually didn't do. But tonight I felt upbeat enough for it. When I got home, it was just past 8 o'clock. My parents weren't home yet, which was no surprise. I went into the kitchen and heated up chicken and rice. Then I sat at the table, taking out my phone. I had a couple of messages from Allie-Ann. You see Scott's story? She's all over him. Did you do Doc Pinkman's homework yet? Sam. Allie-Ann, can you call? She read the message, and within 2 minutes my phone was ringing. Hey. I greeted with an enthusiasm she didn't hear much of these days. Whoa, you're cheery. Her smooth alto voice came over the phone. You won't believe this. You will not believe this, Allie. What? She sounded annoyed by my high-strung tone. I went up to Loser's Leap today, like usual. But for the first time ever, I ran into somebody up there. Was it a ghost? No, it was a girl, a gorgeous girl. A girl. You met a girl up at Loser's Leap. Yeah. Her name was Leona. I plugged in my headphones and then sat down, cutting through the chicken breast with my fork. Allie, she was the prettiest girl I've ever seen in my entire life. Wavy blonde hair, these glowing turquoise eyes, and she could sing. Allie was quiet for a moment. Kinda weird you met her up there. Well, yeah, I mean, I've never met anyone there before. I already said that, but that's not the point. I did meet her. You think she's up to something? I don't know why else she'd be up there. I rolled my eyes. No, Allie, she was up there to play guitar by herself, just like I go up there to write by myself. I go up there a lot and I'm not up to something. But you said she was hot, right? Well, I guess, yeah. So I mean, like, not to sound rude, but you going up there makes sense. But why would she? If she's so hot. Like you say? What the hell is that supposed to mean? Come on, you know what I mean, Sam. That it makes sense for a loser like me to sit out there alone, but not someone that's attractive. Okay, don't make it sound like that. How else did you mean it? Look, just chill, okay? She got excited. Sam, all I meant was, you're not necessarily Mr. Popular. You've told me word for word you go up there a lot because you have nothing better to do. Well, if she's from around here and pretty, I'm sure she's driving all the boys crazy. She probably has a lot else to do. So why's she up on Loser's Leap? Where do the loners go? Just doesn't add up. She went up there to play guitar. She wanted a place to be alone, to practice. It isn't complicated. I guess. I sat there for a moment. Why couldn't she just be happy for me? Every single time I talked to her, all she did was argue with me or make me sound dumb. I mean, what was even the point of speaking to her? I never felt fulfilled or happy. I never felt like I was talking to a friend. After spending just one afternoon with Leona, I already felt closer to her than I did with Allie-Ann in years. You know what, Allie? I think I gotta go. Aw, come on, Sam, she replied. But, I responded, every time I tell you any good news, it's like, you just try to downplay it and make it sound stupid. Well, it sucks you can't be happy for your friend when I found someone I actually enjoy talking to. She was silent for a second. You don't enjoy talking to me? I paused. No, not really. All you ever talk about is Scott. I'm tired of it. I already told you Scott is a douchebag that doesn't deserve the unconditional kindness you give him. But you never listen. You let him walk all over you, again and again and again, and then come crying to me like it's the first time it happened. All you ever have to say is Scott this and Scott that. I don't care about Scott. I don't want to hear about Scott. If I wanted to know that much about Scott, I'd talk to him. You and I haven't had one real conversation since 6th grade. To my shock, I thought I could hear her sniffling. Oh. Well, if that's how you feel, then I guess I gotta go too. Come on, Allie, don't make it out like this is my fault. Whatever, Sam. Glad you found somebody you like talking to. She hung up on me. I sat there feeling mixed emotions. Maybe what I said was harsh. There was probably a more tactful way I could have gotten it off my chest. But then again, who was I, sitting there feeling guilty? Besides being a little rude, I didn't do anything wrong. I had every right to feel how I did. If Allie Ann cared about me, I sure as hell couldn't tell. She never supported me, never thanked me, never acknowledged our friendship. She treated me like her bedroom drywall, something she could vent to, before walking away and shutting the lights off. And I was sick of it. I was so used to it, I didn't even realize how bad of a friend she was. But talking to Leona made me realize it. I felt happier and more alive in those couple of hours than I'd felt since I was 12 years old. And sure enough, over the next couple of days, I didn't talk with Allie Ann at all. I saw her around school, and we didn't really acknowledge one another. And guess what? My life was no different. In fact, it even sort of felt like a weight had been lifted off my shoulders. I mean, don't get me wrong, I missed her, by instinct. But then I'd tell myself that the Allie Ann I was missing had been gone for years. The day I'd met Leona was April 26th, and I counted down the days until May 5th. As excited as I was, though, some part of me just felt that disappointment was inevitable, that I'd sit out there all day waiting for her and she'd never show. Even worse was that May 5th was a Saturday, so I really had no idea when she planned on showing up. I spent my days either dreaming of Leona at work or sitting out at the Leap and thinking about her. Finally, May 5th arrived. I won't lie, I woke up that morning in a cold sweat. As much as I wanted to believe she'd show somehow deep inside, I just knew she wasn't going to come. I tried to imagine her stepping into the clearing, seeing her beautiful eyes again, hearing her intoxicating voice. But all I could envision was the hours ticking by, waiting in the hot seat for her to arrive, and finally sulking away back to my car at dusk, alone and disappointed like always. I got to the Leap around 1 o'clock in the afternoon. I brought a basket with some sandwiches and fruit, and 2 bottles of sweet tea. It might have been a bit much, but that first impression she chose to make really stuck with me. I figured I'd be brazen too. I leaned against the tree, taking out my pocket knife that never left my side, cutting up an apple and eating it casually. When I finished, I added more to a story I was working on. Then, around 3 o'clock, my writing was interrupted. Against all odds, I heard someone walking up the hill. My palms were clammy and my heart raced. I could barely breathe, staring in the direction of the sound. She stepped out of the trees. I met her hypnotic turquoise eyes, her soft, smiling pink lips, her sun-kissed face. Today she wore a pink flannel and once again carried her guitar case. "Hey, Sam," she smiled. "Hey, Leona." I grinned. My entire body was alight with thrill and relief. She came over and sat next to me, and I breathed in her perfume, withdrawing an ecstatic sigh. "So, I brought us some lunch," I smiled, opening the picnic basket. "I got sandwiches and fruit. There is ham and cheese, turkey with mayo, and peanut butter and jelly. And then some apples and bananas." "Oh, Sam," she smiled at me. "You brought me lunch?" "Yeah." And I stuck my hand in the basket. "Here," I handed her a bottle of sweet tea. "Hope you like sweet tea." This is so thoughtful. Aw, really, it was nothing. We spent the day together talking, laughing, and telling one another all about our lives. I told her about Allie Ann, how we'd been inseparable from preschool until 6th grade, and then how she became popular and started to write me off. I even told her about the fight we'd gotten in a little over a week ago, and how we hadn't talked since. I told her about my parents, how they were mostly never around, and how I spent my time either working at Shaw's with people twice my age or writing at Loser's Leap. She told me that Clover was a lot like Sherman, with just a slightly bigger population of 6,000 and a similar situation with only one high school in town. She told me that she was decently popular, but she didn't really like any of her classmates. She said they were all fake with materialistic priorities, and she had no one to really talk to, at least beyond a surface level. She said that guys were all over her, treating her like some trophy they were all competing to obtain. But that, none of them actually took the time to just sit down and get to know her. She said her home situation was a lot like mine. She was also an only child, and her family was mostly never around. But her father was Clover's very own chief of police, and he could be really controlling, which added a lot of stress to her life. Still, the more we talked, the more I realized our lives were pretty similar. She said she'd started playing guitar and singing when she was 10, and it was something for her to do when she was bored and alone at home. At first, I wondered if she could really relate to loneliness. Maybe she didn't spend a lot of time with people, but unlike me, it was her choice. She was swimming in attention, invited to parties, approached by classmates. She didn't have to spend a single weekend alone if she didn't want to. But the more she explained it, the more I realized just how unfulfilling her situation was. Too, she was enveloped by people that didn't really care about her, just wanted her for her looks, and no one tried or cared to understand her. Began to really sympathize with her. That had to be isolating in its own way. We stayed out there until dark. This time, before she left, she did something that surprised me. "Well, Sam," she smiled at me. "It was fun. Until next time." "May 13th, I nodded. "Can't wait." She looked at me for a moment, then she embraced me. Her soft arms wrapped around me, and I breathed in her scent, feeling her chest pressed against mine. I was paralyzed with butterflies. "Thanks for getting to know me, Sam," she whispered softly, her warm breath trickling into my ear. "Course, Leona," I whispered back, awe-stricken. She leaned back, and then she softly kissed my cheek. She looked immediately embarrassed about it, chortling with rosy cheeks as I stared at her in wordless bewilderment, probably looking like a complete and utter idiot. Then she turned, walking off into the woods. "Next Sunday," she called again. "Next Sunday," I called back, my heart firing on all cylinders. "Have a nice night, Sam." The old lady departed, walking off to her car. "You too, ma'am," I called back, standing behind the cash register. It was Saturday, May 12th, a week from when I'd last seen Leona. I was on the closing shift at Shaw's and couldn't wait to get off work. All night, all I could think about was Leona. Tomorrow, I was determined to get her number. Then we could talk all the time. I stared at my watch, 8:52 p.m., just 8 more minutes, and I could start the closing procedures. Then, to my surprise, I felt my phone vibrate in my pocket. I scanned the area for my manager, Luther. Ascertaining he was nowhere in sight, I pulled out my phone, wondering who on earth had sent me a message. It was a Snapchat message from Allie Ann. Wow, I thought. How damn bizarre. We hadn't spoken at all since the phone call. It had been about 3 weeks. At around 10 o'clock, I finally clocked out and walked through the chilly night to my red Accord in the starlit parking lot. I climbed inside, turning the heat on, then tapped the message, surprised by how nervous I was to do so. "Sam, I miss you." This shocked me. I couldn't believe she'd even noticed me gone. "Hey, Allie, I miss you too." I went to shift the gear to drive, but she had already responded. Surprised, I read the next message. "Can we hang out?" "Tomorrow? It's been way too long." "Aw, sorry, Allie, I'm meeting Leona tomorrow, maybe Monday?" "Oh, all right, sure." "Hey," I replied, "want to call tonight?" "Okay." I drove home. At last, I slid out of my work clothes. I got a hot shower, then crawled into my bed, lying beneath the warm covers. I called Allie Ann, and for the first time in weeks, I heard her voice outside of her Snapchat story. "Hey, Sam." "Allie," I smiled, and it actually brought me a lot of comfort to hear from her again. "I've missed you." "You too. Asshole. Making me message you first." I chuckled. "Yeah, sorry. So, how's life been, Allie?" Not much to talk about, but some good news. Yeah? I gave up on Scott. What? You did? Yeah, you were right, Sam, she sighed. Scott is an asshole. He really is. The other night I found him with Elise at Jack's party in his parents' bedroom. Not even Abby. Wow. I laughed. Sounds like Scott. Yeah. So, how's everything going for you? And how are things with Leona? It's going great. Honestly, things are going great for me. I know I've only hung out with her twice, but when I'm with her, I just feel understood. I don't know. It's really something. I can't wait to see her tomorrow. Basically spend all my time just sitting around and looking forward to the next time I see her. I chuckled. Wow, she replied. She's really something, huh? Yeah, she really is. Well, get a picture of her for me next time. So I know you're not making it up, she smiled dully. Oh, all right, I laughed. Sure. Why have you only seen her twice? Is she really busy or something? I don't know. I just never asked to meet her anywhere besides Loser's Leap. She just tells me the next time she's going, and then I meet her there. But tomorrow I'm going to try to get her number so we can talk more. Well, that's awesome, Sam. I'm glad it's working out for you. Me too, Allie, me too. I haven't been this happy in a while. Allie didn't say anything for a moment. Sam, remember when we were like 9 and you caught that walleye? It was absolutely huge. Yeah, they laughed. That thing was like 5 feet long, and we cooked it up for supper. We just sat out there by the river all night telling each other ghost stories and stuff. I miss that. You do? Yeah. I mean, that was fun. We should do something like that again sometime. You? And me? Go camping? I was speechless. Yeah, I mean, unless you think it'd be weird or something. Nah, Allie, I'd totally love to do that. But wouldn't you like to be busy at a party or something? No, I won't be. Maybe next weekend? Maybe. I'll see when Leona wants to meet next, okay? Oh, all right, cool. Her tone changed. You good, Allie? Yeah. The rest of the night we talked casually. I won't lie, it was awesome hearing from her again. It reminded me how much she meant to me, that even though she was different now, she was still, after all, my best friend. The next day, I excitedly drove up to Loser's Leap, blasting Led Zeppelin in my car. I couldn't believe that so many people were afraid of that place. And yet for me, it was where I was more alive than anywhere else. When I got there this time, Leona was waiting for me. When she saw me, she ran up and hugged me. Once again, I was hit with butterflies. We talked for a while, and finally I mustered up the courage to ask, Hey, Leona, do you think that maybe I could get your number? Or like your social media or something? I don't have social media, she admitted. My dad's pretty protective, and my number, she seemed to be debating it, but then she frowned. I don't think it'd be a good idea. I'm sorry, Sam, really, I wish I could. Oh well, I get it, seriously, don't sweat it. We can keep meeting here though, she smiled. Okay. I smiled back. Well, if not that, can I get a picture of us together? Maybe this sounds creepy, but when we don't see each other for a while, I sort of wish I at least had a picture of you to look at. Oh, she blushed. Sam, I just don't like taking pictures of myself. Please, Leona. Not today. My makeup's horrible. No, it's not. I chuckled. You look great, Leona. Sam, she whispered. To my surprise, she extended her hand, cupping my cheek. My body was paralyzed. Her soft fingers caressed my face as her hypnotic, turquoise eyes stole my breath. I don't mean to be so dodgy. Can I make up for it with a kiss? With what? I stammered. She smirked. Then her eyes shut, and she leaned in, pressing her soft lips against mine. I could hardly breathe, if I'm being honest. All throughout my life, I heard so much about platitudinous things like true love's kiss, fireworks, sparks, blah, blah, blah. But the 2 girls I'd ever kissed felt nothing like that. Allie-Ann and I kissed in 1st grade. We didn't even know what we were doing, just saw it on a TV show and tried it out. And then in 8th grade, I kissed a girl, my first girlfriend. Though I didn't feel anything for her really, and only agreed to date her because I thought it might be fulfilling. This kiss, however, was incomparably different. It left me spellbound, completely absorbed in the moment. It was something more than just two people's lips touching. It was a magic, electrical connection. I don't even want to know how cringy my expression was when she leaned back. You kissed. Yeah, sorry, she giggled. Don't apologize, I chortled. I exhaled. It's okay, Leona. The thing about your dad and stuff, it's okay, we'll just keep meeting here. She looked a lot more touched by that than I would have guessed she'd be. Yay, she breathed. For the next 2 months, we saw each other just about every weekend. Sadly, Allie and I never got around to camping. I suggested meeting up with Leona in Clover, but she reminded me that her father was the chief of police, and if a cop saw her with me, he'd tell her dad. Then we'd probably never see each other again. Obviously not wanting to risk that, I was okay with just meeting at the Leap. Still, when I was lonely, I'd listen to the recording I'd secretly taken of her while she was singing, because she was too shy to outright let me film her. By the end of July, the two of us were dating. And though I don't think Allie believed me that she was real, because Leona wouldn't let me take a picture of her, every time I offered Allie to come out to Loser's Leap with me to meet her, she said she didn't want anything to do with that place. Though seeing Leona was awesome, she was getting increasingly depressed with every visit. She told me more and more about her controlling father and how she felt like he was suffocating her. She said that sometimes she honestly did think I was the only good thing in her life. It broke my heart, but if I'm being totally upfront, it also kind of warmed it at the same time. How could I be lucky enough to be the one who was there? For her, I was so honored I could be the one to cheer her up. It was now July 18th, a Wednesday, and I was out at Loser's Leap writing a poem. That Friday, I was scheduled to meet Leona again. At around 6 o'clock, to my shock, I heard someone coming up the path. I wondered for a moment if it was Leona, but when a stranger stepped out, I instantly felt on edge. "Oh," the woman gasped. She seemed to be in her early 30s. She was tan with dark hair and eyes. "I'm sorry if I scared you," I apologized. No, my bad." She laughed awkwardly. "I just didn't expect to see anyone up here." "Me neither. So, what brings you up here?" "Oh, well, does the name Cassidy Byers sound familiar to you?" "Cassidy Byers. Kind of. She committed suicide here 10 years ago. 10 years ago to the day, actually. I'm her sister." "Oh, I'm so sorry to hear that." "It's okay." She sat down on a rock. "Yep, 10 years ago today, Cassidy took her life here. I guess I was just coming out here to pay my respects. After all, that grave of hers is empty. Her body was never found. So, this is the real last place she ever was." "I don't know what to say," I confessed. "I'm just so sorry that happened." "Yeah, it's like they say. You learn to accept it, but you never really get over it. I could have been a much better sister to her. I really neglected her. Back then, didn't realize it until it was too late. Hey," I tried to console her, noticing she really needed someone to talk to. "It's not your fault. Maybe not, but maybe there was something I could have done, Sorry." "I'm sorry," she sighed awkwardly. "None of this is your problem. You probably just came up here to be alone." No, it's fine. If you need to talk about anything, I've got nowhere else to be." "Well, She was clearly troubled and couldn't hide it on her face. "What is it?" "Look, I'm sorry to be dropping all this on you. There's something the papers never published about Cassidy, and sometimes it just really bothers me." The words made me uncomfortable. "What is it?" "She used to come here to meet somebody," she revealed. The hair on the back of my neck stood up. "I can't remember her name now. It was so long ago. All I remember is that she'd come out here to visit with someone. Said that she was her only friend. I'd always ask her why she never had her friend over. but she'd tell me her friend's dad wouldn't be okay with it or something. It never made a lot of sense to me. She kept inviting me out here to meet her, and finally, one day, after she'd left, something just didn't feel right. I decided I'd come out here to meet her friend. I got to the parking grounds and saw Cassidy's car and walked the trail all the way up here to the leap. But she seemed to tremble. "What?" I asked calmly. She was talking, but there was nobody there. "What?" I whispered. She was having a full-fledged conversation with no one. My body was covered in goosebumps. "Yeah," the woman nodded. "I know. I was terrified too. I thought that maybe I could hear another voice, but there was definitely no one there besides Cassidy. I walked out of the tree line, and Cassidy yelled, 'Hey, where are you going?' Then she turned around and told me I scared her friend off. But nobody ran away, nobody left. There was no one there besides Cassidy and me. I didn't even know what to say. I told our mom about it, but she didn't believe me, and I can't really doubt her. She was sure I just missed the girl somehow. And then sure enough, one day, Cassidy came out here to meet her friend and disappeared. Do you think..." She was like, "I don't know, crazy?" she asked. "Yeah, I don't know. Maybe she was doing drugs. I really don't know. But with the rumors about this place and then that happening, listen, something about this place just isn't right. I know it's pretty and that out here you get to be alone. Cassidy used to say all that stuff. But there's something evil out here. And that's why Cassidy and so many people before her took their lives here. I just know it after what I saw that day. I'm surprised that after seeing that, you'd come out here by yourself." "Well, I'm not totally alone," she admitted. "My husband's in the car. If I'm not back in 30 minutes, he's supposed to come up here looking for me. But I just wanted some alone time with Cassidy on the 10th anniversary of her death or disappearance or whatever. Well, I'll give you some alone time." I started to walk away, but she called, "Hey, just, be careful coming up here, all right?" "Uh-huh," I nodded. "I will, thanks." Ever since that night, Loser's Leap for the first time ever creeped me out. When I got home, I sat at my desk and Googled Cassidy Byers' suicide. Some articles came up, all about how she'd one day simply disappeared after coming out there. None of them specified her meeting a friend, except one, which included a testimony from her sister stating she'd been visiting someone on the leap. Police searched for suspects but found nothing. The more I looked into it, the more I realized how mysterious her death was. For the most part, she didn't seem very depressed. No one really saw it coming. And then one day, she simply disappeared, and it was ruled a suicide. She didn't have a lot of friends, and her family said they felt responsible for not giving her enough attention. But still, she didn't seem suicidal to anyone. Out of curiosity, I decided to look into the history of Loser's Leap. A lot of the deaths were rumors, some proven untrue, and others plausible. And the Native American story was folklore, impossible to validate or not. But then I looked into Ricardo Elias's death. Something about this that confused me was that, unlike the popular legend described, he wasn't cornered by law enforcement on the hill. Police simply found his body at the base of it on the riverbed and discovered that he was a draft dodger from South Florida when they eventually identified him. When his corpse turned up in the paper, numerous townspeople explained that they'd seen him around for a couple of months, and that though his mission to escape conscription was unknown to them, when he'd first arrived in town, he seemed to be in a hurry, and then mysteriously, he settled down and didn't leave. He even got a job as a woodcutter, and his employers said he didn't come across as suicidal at all, even though it was assumed the pressures of getting caught and sent to prison or Vietnam eventually drew him over the edge. He wasn't close to getting caught, and he didn't show suicidal tendencies to anyone that interacted with him. And then, I looked into Mike Merkel's death in 1986. It was harder to find specific information about him, but to my shock, his story sounded similar to Cassidy's. A lot of articles detailed that he was lonely and showed signs of deep depression, but one of them explained there was a police investigation into his death being a homicide, and that perhaps he was pushed A close friend of his mentioned he'd been meeting a girl there. A girl named Leona. Police searched for Leona in Sherman and the towns nearby, but the one and only girl they met with that name didn't fit the description. A young woman with blonde hair and light eyes. When I read that, I can't describe. The terror I felt, what were the odds? It couldn't be a coincidence. The article went on to say that they were dating, but Mike's friend had never met her, and she only met with Mike at Loser's Leap, just like my Leona. His story and Cassidy's story were identical to mine. I was meeting Leona at Loser's Leap, who would never meet with me anywhere else. She looked like the girl described in Mike Merkel's homicide investigation, blonde hair with light eyes, and just like Cassidy's sister had told me. She mentioned having a controlling father that made it impossible for her to meet me anywhere else but Loser's Leap. Still, she was Leona. Leona, my girlfriend, the girl who I thought about all the time, who would sing to me and read my poetry and take my mind off my boring, pointless life. How could she be some monster, some evil spirit or something? It couldn't be real. I would have laughed if it wasn't so painful and unnerving. On Friday after school, I ran into Allie Ann before I left to go to the forest. "Hey, weirdo." She smiled at me, flicking her straight brown hair out of her face, her big green eyes centered on me. "You going out to your creepy little hill?" "Allie." My voice carried an unusual seriousness, and I could tell she picked up on it. "Listen to me. If I don't text you in 2 hours, send police to Loser's Leap, all right?" "Whoa. What, Sam? What are you talking about?" "I don't really know how to explain it. I'm going to tell you all about it tonight, though, okay?" "Looks like you were right, though, Allie." I smiled at her. "There is something wrong with Leona. I never should have doubted you." "What do you mean, Sam? You're not thinking about jumping?" "Of course not. I'm not suicidal." "Allie," I grabbed her shoulders, looking into her eyes. "I'm not suicidal. So, if you find my body at the base of that hill, it wasn't a suicide." "Okay. Sam, you're scaring me." Allie. I hugged her. "Listen, it's going to be okay, all right? I'll call you tonight." I ran off. I got in my car and drove away. She watched me the entire time until I exited the parking lot, staring at me like it was the last time she was ever going to see me. As I drove to Loser's Leap, I felt a strong mix of emotions. First and foremost was fear. I didn't believe in ghosts. I never did, but the odds. What were the odds that all the deaths would line up so precisely with my situation? It wasn't conventional at all. And on top of that, why did Ricardo and Mike and Cassidy really die? Did they kill themselves? Were they pushed? Were they manipulated into jumping? I didn't know anything. I just knew that Leona didn't make sense anymore. And neither did their deaths. And worst of all, whatever happened to them was happening to me. But the next feeling, the more powerful one, was an amalgamation of sorrow and betrayal. How could my beautiful Leona be trying to kill me? Could she really be trying to hurt me? The girl I'd sit with and look out at the river, talking with about anything and everything for months on end, showing her my poetry, listening to her beautiful singing. It just couldn't be. Part of me felt embarrassed that this had to all be a ridiculous misunderstanding, and then another part of me even felt angry. Angry that I was being lied to. I knew how I'd find out for sure, though, what Leona was, if she were some sperry or if this was all a massive, asinine conspiracy. I pulled up at Loser's Leap. For the first time, I felt nervous stepping away from my car and into the forest. I walked up the trail that had brought me so much catharsis, excitement, and tranquility. But now, all it brought was trepidation, anxiousness, and longing. When I got to the hilltop, I could see Leona through the trees. Slowly, I took out my phone. I went to my camera and held it up. Before my eyes, Leona sat beneath the branches, her head between her arms, and on my camera there was absolutely nothing. My heart froze over. I placed my phone down on the tree branch and started recording, aiming it at the hilltop. Then I walked into the clearing. Leona looked up at me, tears streaming down her face. "Sam," she whimpered, trudging over to me. She collapsed into My arms. My father, he found out about me coming here. He's not letting me come back again. Once again, I felt a turbulent mix of emotions. I was heartbroken to see her crying. I was terrified that this murderous paranormal figure was alone with me in the wilderness, and I was in love with her, wanting nothing more than to wipe her tears away and make her feel better. What do you mean? I went along with it. He asked me where I've been. She sniffled, her turquoise eyes red with tears, now locked with mine. I just didn't have a cover-up anymore. He'd heard all my excuses. Sam, he's not letting me come back out here anymore. He probably has half of the Clover Police Department looking for me as we speak. What does this mean for us? She was silent for a moment. That's it. We won't be able to see each other anymore. Despite everything I knew, this crushed me. Leona. No. Sam. She sounded broken at first when her tone changed. Sam. She looked up at me, a sternness in her eyes. Let's end it. Let's kill ourselves, together. I don't want to live without you, and what else do you have, Sam? Allie-Ann, your shitty parents? Let's just die together, hand in hand, my love. I couldn't help but imagine Mike Merkel standing here, in her arms, tearing up beneath his glasses, seeing Ricardo abandoning everything for love, escaping Vietnam, and prison with her in his arms. Cassidy's nodding as she decided death would be better than losing her only friend. But I couldn't resist playing the act just a little longer. No matter what she was, no matter what was happening, I was in love with her. I never want to lose you, Leona. Come on, love. She kissed me tenderly. Together. We'll die together. We walked over to the ledge of Loser's Leap, looking out over the river and at the wilderness beyond. It was breathtaking even now. Leona's warm fingers curled around mine. Then I took a deep breath. Is this the same thing you told Mike? And Ricardo? And Cassidy? She froze. Slowly, her head turned toward me, meeting my eyes. What? I know, Leona. I know about their deaths. What really happened? What are you, Leona? What do you get out of this? Why do you do it? What are you talking about, Sam? I sighed a long, bitter sigh. Then I shoved her off the cliff. For a moment, her body descended to the riverbed below. Then, to my complete and utter disbelief, she simply faded away into thin air, simply ceasing to exist. I stood there a while, simply looking out onto the ledge, wondering what had happened. All I could muster was that she was some sort of siren or succubus, preying on people's loneliness and feeding on their souls when they finally gave in and jumped off the edge of Loser's Leap. Perhaps she was some god the Abenaki worshipped, and was simply exacting revenge on the people that had taken her people's land, and so audaciously called it theirs. Who knew? One thing was certain, though. She would never condemn another soul to death again. I walked back into the tree line, grabbing my phone. The entire encounter was recorded, and though you couldn't see her, her voice was able to be heard the entire time. I brought it to the police and they looked into it, finding no sign that I'd altered the footage. Even though they didn't necessarily believe me, the rumors of Loser's Leap's faceless ghosts and nameless apparitions became the tale of Leona the Siren who preyed on the lonely by the river. Without a doubt, if anyone started to experience what I had, they'd realize the severity of the situation they were in. At least so I hoped. They wrote a newspaper article on it, and I knew I'd get made fun of for it, but hell, I was already the town loser. At least maybe this way, I could save a life. The rest of the summer was odd, not having my lonely perch on which to write anymore. But you know what? It was fine. Because Allie-Ann and I had a lot of camping and catching up to do.